I didn't notice him at first, because the wind was loud enough to feel like company scraping across the street and rattling bare branches like fingernails on glass. Snow had fallen earlier and refrozen, so the sidewalks were a hard, crunchy skin over ice. Every step I took cracked and crunched in the emptiness. It was a little after midnight, and I was walking home from a friend's place telling myself it was fine because it was only 15 minutes, and I knew the route by habit. Then I heard a second set of footsteps. Not the occasional shuffle from someone crossing behind you, but a steady rhythm that matched mine so closely it felt like an echo, always a half beat after my own. I slowed, the way you do when you're trying to listen without looking obvious. The second rhythm slowed too. I stopped, near a mailbox, and pretended to adjust my glove. The steps stopped. The silence after that was worse than the sound. I started walking again. The crunching resumed behind me, same distance, same cadence, like the person had been waiting for my decision. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence that we just happened to be headed the same way, but my gut wouldn't let it go. I changed my pace, slower, then faster. The footsteps adjusted every time. That's when my stomach tightened. Whoever was behind me wasn't merely going home. He was matching me. I pulled out my phone for the comfort of light and angled it like I was texting. The battery read low, and the cold made the screen feel sluggish. Under the next streetlight, I caught a clearer glimpse in my peripheral vision. A tall man in a dark hoodie, hands in his pockets, head angled down so I couldn't see his face. He wasn't looking at houses or cars. He was watching me. I tried one more test. I crossed to the other side of the street, slow and casual, like I'd just remembered I needed to be over there. For a few seconds I heard nothing. Then the crunching followed, crossing behind me at the same pace. I turned at the next corner, taking a route that added minutes for no reason. The footsteps turned too. My mouth went dry. It wasn't the sound itself anymore. It was the certainty. The neighborhood felt different once I knew I was being tracked. Every porch was dark. Every window was a black mirror. Even the streetlights seemed farther apart. I considered banging on the first door I saw, but what if no one answered? What if the act of stopping was the thing he wanted? I kept walking, telling myself to get to a public place, somewhere lit and watched. I remembered a small gas station on the main road ahead. Bright lights, cameras, someone inside. I aimed for it, walking fast enough that my boots squeaked on the icy crust. Behind me his steps sped up, still keeping that perfect distance, like he didn't want to spook me into running until he was ready. The wind shoved snow into my eyes. I wiped my face, fumbled my phone, and it slapped onto the sidewalk. I grabbed it, and the screen flashed, once, before dying. The battery hadn't been low. In the cold, it was dead. Panic rose, hard and fast. I swallowed it and kept moving, but now I couldn't even pretend to be calling someone. I could hear him breathing a rough exhale that didn't belong to the wind. He was close enough that I could feel the pressure of someone occupying the space behind my shoulders. I said out loud to no one, "I'm almost home," like declaring it would make it true. I didn't look back, but I heard him shift the brush of fabric, the faint scrape of a shoe catching ice. He was adjusting, preparing. When I reached the intersection, the gas station was there, but it was dark. Sign off. Windows, black, closed. It felt like the street itself had set a trap, and then laughed at me for believing in an exit. For a second I just stood there, frozen in more ways than one, staring at the black windows. The footsteps behind me stopped too. Not far. Close enough that if I turned, I'd see him at the edge of the streetlight. I felt a soundless, don't rise in my throat. I made a decision without thinking. I ran. The instant my footsteps changed from brisk to frantic, his changed too. He started running when I did. Not after a delay, not like he was deciding. Immediately, like he had been waiting for permission. The sound behind me turned heavy, and violent shoes pounding frozen snow, and it was gaining. I cut down a side street, lined with parked cars, wearing thick, white caps. My breath burned. My lungs felt too small. I risked a glance to the side and saw him briefly between two cars, hood up face, still hidden, moving like the cold didn't touch him. There was no confusion in his body language. No. Where is she going? Hesitation. He knew exactly where I was. I slipped on black ice and caught myself on a snowbank, hands numb, knees jolting. For one awful moment my feet skidded, and I thought, this is it. His steps didn't pause. They got closer, and I heard his breathing turn loud, excited. At the end of the block, one porch light glowed, a single bulb over a front door. I didn't know the house, but light meant witnesses. I barreled up the shoveled steps and hammered on the door so hard, my knuckles sparked with pain. Behind me, the pounding stopped. A voice low and steady, too calm for the situation, said, Hey, stop. I just want to talk." I didn't turn around. I knocked again, shouting, "Please open the door." My voice sounded small and broken, and the cold stole the rest of my breath. The porch light threw my shadow onto the snow. Behind it was another shadow tall angled, close enough that it overlapped mine. He had walked right up the driveway. He was right there. The doorknob finally moved. The door opened a few inches, chained. A sleepy man's face appeared. I blurted, "Someone's following me. Please, let me in." His eyes flicked past my shoulder and widened. The chain came off fast. He yanked the door open and pulled me inside like he didn't want me standing in that doorway for 1 second longer. Warm air hit my face, like a wave. The homeowner locked the door, deadbolt and all. Through the glass, I saw the hooded man hesitate at the bottom of the steps, as if deciding whether a lit entryway and another adult were worth it. Then he backed away down the driveway, head down, hands still in his pockets, moving like he wanted to erase himself from the scene now that he'd been seen. The homeowner handed me a phone and called the police while I tried to form words that weren't shaking. When the officers arrived, they asked for a description and the direction he went. We drove the block in their cruiser spotlight, cutting through falling snow, but the streets were empty again, like the night had swallowed him whole. An officer told me carefully to avoid walking alone at night and to trust my instincts. I nodded, but what stuck with me wasn't the advice. It was the moment my body decided to run, and the night answered with someone else choosing instantly to run too, as if my fear had been a starting pistol. Since then, I listen differently. In winter, when snow makes every step loud and honest, I still catch myself counting my own crunches, waiting for that second rhythm to lock in behind me. I take ride shares even in the cold now, and if I have to walk, I keep my head up, my keys ready, and my route full of light. Silence doesn't comfort me anymore. It just reminds me how easy it was for him to disappear. Because once you've heard someone run, when you run, you never forget that sound. The first time the headlights swept over me, I didn't think anything of it. It was winter late, and the street was one long ribbon of black ice, with dirty snow piled along the curbs. Cars drove carefully, slow enough that you could hear the tires whispering over slush before you saw them. I was halfway through my walk home, hood tightened around my face, when a sedan rolled past, and its beams slid across the sidewalk, turning my shadow long and thin on the snow. It kept going, and I kept walking, trying to ignore how alone the neighborhood felt. Most houses were dark porch lights off windows, like black mirrors. Then a minute later, the same headlights came back from the opposite direction. My brain tried to negotiate with reality. Maybe the driver missed a turn, maybe they're lost, maybe it's nothing. The car slowed, as it approached me slower than you'd go if you were just passing a pedestrian. The driver's side window was down an inch. Warm air leaked out with the smell of cigarettes. "Hey," a man's voice called casual, like we were in a normal world. "You know where Maple is," I answered, without stopping, pointing ahead. 2 blocks that way. I didn't look directly at him. I didn't want him to have my face. "Appreciate it," he said, and the sedan rolled on. I waited for relief. It didn't come. Instead, the car reached the next intersection, turned into a side street, disappeared, and then came back again. This time behind me. The headlights hugged the curb, as if the driver wanted to keep me inside the spill of light. I drifted farther from the street. The sedan slowed to match me. The engine idled with a soft, patient purr. He sped up, not running yet, but walking fast the way you do when you're trying to act normal. The car kept the same slow creep beside me. Tires crunched over old snow. A turn signal clicked once, like a thought. The sedan passed me, then made a lazy U-turn at the end of the block. I watched it pivot in the reflection of a dark window because I couldn't make myself turn fully around. Headlights swung and then it was facing me again, inching closer. This wasn't someone lost. This was someone. Looping. I tried one more test, to be sure I wasn't spiraling. I stopped under a streetlight and bent down like I was tying my boot. The sedan slowed and stopped to idling at the curb with its headlights washing over my hands. I stood back up and kept walking, and it rolled forward again. When I crossed to the opposite sidewalk, it followed at a crawl, keeping me in the same cone of light. I tried to catch a plate number, but the rear was caked with road salt and snow spray, and the angle never gave me a clear read. The driver spoke again, voice coaxing. "Seriously, where are you headed?" "I'll drop you off." "No big deal." I didn't answer. I kept walking like he wasn't there, but my pulse was so loud I felt it in my ears. The sedan crept beside me for another half block, then surged ahead and made another slow turn, repeating the loop like it was rehearsed. I pulled out my phone and tapped at the screen like I was on a call. The map loaded halfway and froze. In the cold, even that little comfort felt unreliable. I shoved it back into my pocket and focused on the only thing that mattered. Get to light. Get to people. The driver called out again. "It's freezing. You want to ride?" His tone was friendly, almost annoyed like I was being rude for walking. I kept my eyes forward. "No. Come on," he said. "Window lower now." I could see the glow of the dashboard on his jaw. "I'm just being nice." The problem with nice at midnight is that it always demands something back. I cut toward the main road where I knew there were more streetlights and at least one late-night store. The sedan turned too smooth and immediate, like it had been waiting for me to show it where I was going. 2 blocks suddenly felt like 2 miles. The sedan pulled ahead and stopped at the next corner, as if to block the crosswalk. For a second, the headlights pinned me in place. Then I heard the passenger door click, small but loud enough in the quiet to make my stomach drop. I didn't wait. I crossed the street, hard and fast, and headed for a row of houses, slipping once on ice, but catching myself. The sedan didn't follow into the narrow lane between driveways, but when I peeked back from behind a garbage bin, it had repositioned at the end of the street. Headlights off now, just a dark shape against darker night. It was waiting. Waiting felt worse than chasing. Waiting means time. I forced myself back toward the main road. I wasn't going to end up cornered behind someone's house. I needed cameras. I needed witnesses. When I saw the corner store's buzzing neon, it looked like salvation. I pushed inside hard enough that the bell rattled. Fluorescent light washed over me, and I realized my hands were shaking. The clerk looked up. "You okay?" "A car keeps circling me," I said. It offered me a ride. "It's out there." The clerk's expression shifted from bored to alert. He moved toward the window and angled his body so he could see without being seen. We waited. The street outside was quiet. Then, like it was on a timer, headlights appeared, slow and deliberate, rolling past the store. The sedan didn't stop. The driver turned his head toward the glass toward us, like he wanted me to know he knew where I'd gone. The clerk picked up his phone. "I'm calling it in." While he talked, I stayed away from the windows and tried to breathe normally. Every time the bell jingled, my body tensed, expecting the door to open and a man in a winter jacket to step inside and smile like we were friends. The sedan passed again, then again disappearing around the corner and returning in a slow orbit around the only safe lit place I'd found. The clerk kept describing the car and the repeated passes. Eventually, a patrol car rolled by, lights off slow. The sedan didn't make another loop after that. It was as if it had been spooked, or satisfied, or simply bored. The officer came in and took my statement. Without a plate, there wasn't much to do. He offered to drive me home. I accepted so fast, it felt automatic. As we pulled up to my house, the street looked normal again. Snowbanks, streetlights, empty sidewalks. The officer waited until I went inside. I still stood behind my blinds for a long time, watching the road for that familiar shape. The next day, in daylight, I walked the same block and tried to make it make sense. It looked harmless, quiet houses plowed, piles of snow tracks from kids' boots. But the corner store clerk called me to say he'd checked his exterior camera. The sedan wasn't just passing. It had slowed to a near stop each time it came around, lingering at the curb as if waiting for me to step back outside. He couldn't read the plate either, too much grime, too much distance, but seeing the pattern on video made my skin go cold. It meant I hadn't imagined the timing. Someone had chosen to circle to wait to offer help while testing how far I could be pushed. And once someone has done that to you, you start treating every slow car on a cold street like a question with teeth. I don't know who was in that sedan or what they planned, but I know what it felt like to be a person on foot while someone in a warm car decided to make me the center of their night. Now, when I hear tires whispering over slush behind me, I don't wait for proof. I turn toward light and people, and I refuse to let a stranger decide the shape of my walk home. I didn't realize how exposed I was until I heard my own street name come out of a stranger's mouth like it belonged to him. It was one of those winter nights where the cold feels personal, like it's trying to teach you a lesson. The sidewalks were half cleared, piled with grey snow that had been stomped into dirty ridges, and the wind kept funneling down the empty road in long whining gusts. I was walking home from my closing shift, hood-up scarf over my mouth, hands buried in my pockets, with my keys threaded between my fingers, the way my mom always told me to do. The streets were quiet enough that every sound felt amplified, my boots crunching the distant hum of a highway, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence. I'd taken this route 100 times. I knew which porch light flickered, which driveway always iced over, which mailbox leaned like it was tired. That's why I noticed the car. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't even doing anything dramatic. It was just there, moving slow behind me with its headlights dimmed like it didn't want to look like it was following. At first, I told myself it was a neighbor, trying not to splash slush on the sidewalk. Then it slowed more. The tires made that soft, shushing sound over wet snow, and the engine idled too smoothly for how late it was. I kept my pace steady and stared straight ahead like I didn't see it, because acknowledging it felt like inviting it closer. The car drifted up alongside me, matching my speed. The passenger window lowered a few inches. Warm air spilled out, carrying the faint smell of fast food and something sour like old coffee. A man's voice called out, too friendly for midnight. "Hey, you." Okay, I didn't answer. The car stayed with me, creeping. "It's cold as hell," he said, chuckling like we were sharing a joke. "Want a ride?" I shook my head once small, hoping that would end it. Instead, he laughed again like my refusal was cute. "Come on," he said. "I'm not a stranger." That line hit me wrong. People who aren't strangers don't need to announce it. I angled slightly toward the houses away from the curb, keeping space between me and the passenger door. The car rolled forward a little, then slowed again, so it was still beside me. I could feel him watching through the gap in the window. I didn't look, but I could sense the shape of his attention, the way you can sense someone staring at your back. "You're almost there anyway," he said casually, and I felt my stomach tighten. I kept walking. My heart started beating in a way that made my whole body feel loud. "Seriously," he continued, voice still light, "I can drop you off right at the door." No reason to freeze. I forced a calm tone. "No, I'm good." The car idled. The man sighed, like I was inconveniencing him. Then he said it like he was reading it off a piece of paper. "You live on Alder Ridge, Wright Blue House, number 1842. My brain didn't process it at first. It was like hearing someone say your full name in a place you don't expect. I stopped walking without meaning to. The wind hit me hard, and suddenly I could hear everything. The car's engine, my own breath, the faint click of a turn signal he wasn't using. "What did you say?" I asked. And the moment the words left my mouth, I regretted it because it meant I'd engaged. The man's voice got warmer, satisfied. "Alder Ridge," he repeated. 1842. Blue shutters. You've got that little reef that stays up way too long after Christmas. My throat went dry. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't fishing. He knew. I forced myself to start walking again, but my legs felt strange, like my body had turned into something separate from me. The car moved, with me slow, patient. "Don't be like that," he said, and I heard the smile in his voice. "I've seen you. Plenty of times. I know you. You work late. You always take this route. You always check your phone under the streetlight by the Miller place. My hands clenched so hard around my keys it hurt. My mind raced through possibilities. Had he watched me from the street, from a parked car? Had he followed me from work? I didn't even know what he looked like, and that made it worse, because it meant he could be anyone I'd passed without noticing. I looked ahead and saw the next intersection, and beyond it, the darker stretch where the streetlights thinned out. If I kept going straight, I'd be walking into a longer pocket of darkness. If I turned, I'd be showing him where I was going. I made a decision fast. I wasn't going home, not while he was behind me. I cut left at the corner, heading toward the main road, where there were brighter lights and a 24-hour pharmacy. The car slowed, like it might miss the turn, then made it anyway clean and immediate, as if it had anticipated that choice. My stomach dropped. He wasn't just waiting to see where I'd go. He could keep up with any decision I made. I pulled my phone out to call someone, and the screen lit up just long enough for me to see the cruel message, 2% battery. I had forgotten to charge it at work. The cold was draining it faster. I dialed 911 anyway, hands shaking, thumb slipping on the glass. Before it could connect, the screen went black, dead. I stood there for half a second, staring at my own reflection in the dark screen like the phone had turned into a tiny mirror showing me how helpless I was. The car rolled closer. I heard the window lower more. "See," he said softly. "You don't need to call anybody. You're fine. Just get in. I'll take you home." I could hear the way he said home, like it was a place he owned. I walked faster, almost a jog. The car kept pace, engine barely working, just gliding beside me. The neighborhood around us felt abandoned. The snowbanks high enough to hide in the driveways, empty the houses, asleep. I scanned for any porch light, any sign of life, and that's when I saw it. A house with a bright motion light over the garage, and a car in the driveway that looked like someone was actually home. I veered up the driveway like I belonged there. The man in the car reacted immediately, accelerating a little, then braking confused for the first time. He couldn't follow me up a private driveway without making it obvious. I ran up the steps and hammered on the door with both fists. The motion light snapped on, flooding the porch, and for a brief second the street behind me was lit like a stage. The sedan idled at the curb. I could see the outline of the driver's head turned toward me. I pounded again harder and shouted, "Please, open the door." My voice cracked in the cold air. Inside, I heard movements slow at first, then faster. A man's voice called, "Wary." "Who is it?" I didn't have time for politeness. "I'm sorry," I said, breathless. "Someone is following me. Please, I need help." The lock clicked. The door opened and a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt stood there, eyes wide, taking in my face, my panic. His gaze flicked past me to the street, to the waiting car. The sedan's engine revved, slightly impatient. The man didn't hesitate. He grabbed my sleeve and pulled me inside. The warmth hit me so hard it made my eyes sting. He shut the door, locked it, and stood with his back against it for a moment, like he was bracing for impact. "Stay away from the windows," he said. He moved to a side window anyway, carefully peeking through the curtain, without letting his face show. The sedan sat there another 10 seconds, maybe 20, then slowly rolled forward, turned at the end of the block, and disappeared into the dark like it had never existed. The homeowner handed me his phone and told me to call the police. My fingers were numb, but my mind had never been clearer. When dispatch answered, I gave the address we were at, and then I said the words that still make my skin crawl. He knew my address. He said my house number. The officers arrived quickly, lights washing the snow blue and red. They drove the area, looked for the sedan, took my statement. One officer asked if anyone at work could have gotten my info. Another asked if I'd posted my location online. I shook my head to all of it, because I couldn't explain the simplest truth. Sometimes someone watches you without leaving any trace you can point to until the moment they decide to speak. The homeowner offered to drive me the rest of the way, and the officers followed behind. When we turned onto Alder Ridge, every mailbox looked suddenly like a marker, every driveway like a place a car could sit without being noticed. My blue house looked harmless under the streetlight wreath, still hanging exactly like he'd said. The officer walked me to my door, waited while I unlocked it, then waited while I locked it again. After they left, I stood in my entryway, listening to the house settle, hearing the wind tap at the windows. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, phone charging keys still clenched in my hand. In the morning, when the sun rose and the snow glittered like nothing bad could happen, I opened my front door and saw fresh tire tracks pressed into the slush at the curb in front of my house, deeper than the rest, like someone had parked there for a while. There was no note, no broken window, nothing dramatic. Just those tracks, and the knowledge that sometime in the night, after I'd been escorted home, a stranger had still come to my street and sat there long enough to remind me that knowing where you live is the first thing they take away. After that, every walk home felt different. Not because the route changed, but because I did. I stopped thinking of my address as a safe place and started thinking of it as information, something that could be learned, repeated, weaponized, with a smile through a cracked car window. Snow makes lies harder to tell because every step leaves proof and every sound carries farther than it should. That's what I kept telling myself on the night the footsteps started matching mine. It was early winter, the kind of cold that dries your throat and makes your eyelashes feel brittle, and the snow on the sidewalk was fresh enough that it still looked clean, untouched like a blank page. I was walking home from the bus stop with my hood up and my head down, trying to tuck my face into my scarf so the wind wouldn't bite at my skin. The streetlights were spaced too far apart, creating long stretches of darkness where the world felt erased. Under each light, I could see my own footprints behind me for a few seconds, before they vanished into shadow again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. My boots pressed into the snow with that crisp sound that's almost satisfying in the daytime. At night, it felt like I was broadcasting my location. I was halfway down the first block when I heard it, another crunch faint behind me, timed wrong at first, like someone stepping onto the sidewalk from a driveway. I didn't panic. People walk at night. Someone could be out with a dog. Someone could be heading home, too. I kept my pace steady and listened. Crunch, crunch, then my own step crunch. Then there's again a half beat after mine, close enough that it felt like an echo but heavier, like a larger shoe. I slowed slightly, testing. The second set of steps slowed too. I stopped under a streetlight, as if I'd gotten a text, lifting my phone, letting the screen glow against my gloves. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Not even a shuffle. Nothing. The air felt thick. I could hear the wind and my own breathing and the faint hum of distant traffic, but behind me, there was nothing at all like whoever had been there had evaporated the moment I paused. My instinct screamed at me to turn and look to confirm, to give my brain something it could categorize. But another part of me knew that turning around was exactly what would make it real. I stayed facing forward, counting seconds like it was a game. 1, 2, 3. Then, softly crunch. One step, then another. Whoever it was had started moving again, only after I did, only after I had resumed walking as if they were waiting for my permission to exist. My hands tightened in my pockets around my keys. The street ahead was empty. No cars, no porch lights, no other pedestrians. I tried to rationalize maybe it's a neighbor who doesn't want to spook me, someone being polite by stopping when I stop. But the sound behind me didn't have the hesitant rhythm of politeness. It was steady, controlled, patient. Crunch, 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 always a half beat after my own, always the same distance, never drifting closer and never falling back like it was measured. I changed my pace again, speeding up for 10 steps. The other steps sped up exactly with me. I slowed down. They slowed. I stopped. They stopped. The precision was what made my skin go cold. People don't accidentally synchronize like that for long. It takes attention. It takes intent. I veered slightly toward the houses away from the curb, using the snowbank as a barrier. Under the next streetlight, I finally risked a glance at my shadow on the ground, hoping to catch a second shadow stretching behind it. For a second I saw nothing but my own long shape and the drifting snow. Then the light flickered, and in that brief stutter of illumination, a second shadow appeared at the edge of the circle, tall and angled, just outside the brightest part of the lamp, as if whoever it belonged to knew exactly where to stand to, be seen only if you were looking for them. The shadow vanished when the light steadied, but the footsteps remained quiet now, as if the person had moved off the packed sidewalk into the softer snow to reduce the sound. That thought hit me like a shove. They can change the sound. They can choose when you hear them. I picked up my pace and headed toward the main road, where I knew there were more lights. But between me and that road was a small park, a shortcut with a walking path that cut through a patch of trees. In daylight, it was normal. At night, it was a tunnel. The longer route stayed on the street with lights, but it added 10 minutes. I could feel the presence behind me like a pressure against my back, and 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. I chose the lit route. I did not want to be alone among trees with someone who could turn their footsteps on and off like a switch. The problem was, the lit route required crossing an open stretch where the streetlights didn't work. A long dark gap between two functioning lamps. As I approached that gap, the footsteps behind me grew louder again, returning to the packed snow, crunching like they wanted me to know they were there. My pulse spiked. The darkness ahead looked thicker than the rest, like it swallowed light instead of reflecting it. I stepped into it anyway, because stopping meant letting them close the distance. The moment I left the circle of light, the world changed. The snow absorbed sound. My own steps became dull, muffled. The air felt colder, emptier, and behind me the footsteps disappeared completely. No crunch, no shuffle, nothing. It was worse than hearing them. If I couldn't hear them, I couldn't measure them. I couldn't know if the distance was the same or shrinking. I fought the urge to run because running on ice is how you fall, and falling is how you lose. The only advantage you have, staying upright. I forced myself to walk fast, controlled scanning the dark shapes of parked cars and bushes for movement. Then behind me, I heard it again, but not where it should have been. Crunch. Off to the side, closer than before, like someone had cut through a yard parallel to me and was now rejoining the sidewalk ahead. The hair on my arms lifted under my coat. I turned my head slightly and saw a darker shape moving between two houses. Just a suggestion of a person not lit enough to describe, but real enough to make my mouth go dry. They weren't behind me anymore. They were trying to get in front of me. The next streetlight was only 30 yards away. It might as well have been 30 miles. I broke into a run anyway, careful short steps, trying not to slip. The shape moved faster too, and I heard snow compressing under a heavier weight, no longer trying to hide the sound. The footsteps weren't matching mine anymore. They were chasing. I reached the streetlight and skidded into the circle of light, breath burning, and I did something I'd been avoiding. I looked back. The sidewalk behind me was a clean strip of snow, my footprints stamped in a straight line, and there, perfectly spaced behind them, was another set close enough that in places it looked like their heel had nearly landed in my print. But what made my stomach drop was the point where those second footprints stopped. They didn't stop because the person turned around. They stopped because the person had stepped off the sidewalk into the yard where the snow was deeper, and the prints disappeared into the shadow between houses. In other words, they had left the path where I could track them and moved into a place where I couldn't. I stared into that gap and saw nothing. No face, no eyes, just darkness. I backed away without taking my eyes off it, and my shoulder bumped into something cold and metal, a parked car. I realized I'd cornered myself against it. My keys were in my fist, but I didn't even know what I was aiming at because the threat had become a space, a blank patch of night where someone could be standing perfectly still. Then from that darkness a voice came out low and calm, like it was right next to my ear, even though I couldn't see anyone. "Why are you walking so fast?" The question was almost polite, almost curious. That was the final straw. I didn't answer. I sprinted toward the main road, the only place left with traffic and light. My lungs burned, my boots slipping, and behind me the footsteps returned loud, direct, no longer pretending to be an echo. I burst onto the main road and nearly stumbled into the street, forcing a car to brake. The driver honked, rolled down his window, and shouted something angry. I pointed back with a shaking hand and shouted, "Call the police!" He looked at my face, saw whatever was written there, and his expression changed. He pulled over hazards on and stayed there. The footsteps behind me stopped again just as suddenly as they'd started, as if whoever had been chasing didn't want to be seen under the bright wash of headlights and passing cars. I stood under the glow of a gas station sign across the road, trying to breathe, staring back toward the darker street. I expected to see someone sprint away. I expected movement. I saw nothing. Just the quiet sidewalk leading into shadow, my prints and those other prints disappearing into the night. When the police arrived, they searched the area, but fresh snow and darkness are a perfect alibi. All the officer could do was look at the footprints and nod slowly like he'd seen this kind of pattern before. I walked the rest of the way home in the back of the patrol car, heat-blasting hands still clenched around my keys like they were part of my body. The next morning in daylight, I went back to that streetlight, partly because I needed to prove it had happened and partly because some part of me wanted to see the story written clearly in the snow. But the snow had started to melt, and my footprints were gone, softened into nothing. The only thing left was the feeling of it, the way a second set of steps can become your shadow, the way silence can be a weapon, and the way winter can make you hear every promise a person makes just by choosing where to place their feet. The first whistle sounded so normal that my brain tried to file it under harmless things. Someone walking a dog, someone tipsy and in a good mood, some late-night smoker taking the long way home. It was a cold, clean winter night, the kind where the air feels sharp enough to cut your lungs if you breathe too fast. I was walking home from a coworker's place after a small get-together. Nothing wild, just pizza and talking until everyone realized how late it had gotten. The streets were empty, and the snow that had fallen earlier was packed down into crunchy sheets along the sidewalks. Every streetlight carved out a circle of visibility, and everything between those circles felt like it didn't exist. I had my hood up, and my hands in my pockets, keys laced between my fingers. My phone was at 18% low enough to make me uneasy, high enough to make me think I was being dramatic for worrying. The whistle came again, a little louder. This time 3 notes that rose and fell, like someone casually humming through their lips. It wasn't a song I recognized. It wasn't cheerful either. It was steady measured, like a signal someone could repeat without thinking. I kept walking and told myself not to be paranoid. Then I noticed the timing the whistle always came right after my footsteps. Crunch, 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 and then the whistle, like punctuation. I slowed down, pretending to adjust my scarf. The whistling stopped. I stood under a streetlight and stared at my phone screen like I was reading something important. The street behind me looked empty, but I couldn't see past the next pool of darkness. The wind scraped through bare branches, and I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my gloves. After a few seconds, I started walking again. Crunch, crunch, and the whistle returned instantly closer now, as if whoever was doing it had been waiting for my movement like a cue. I told myself it could still be coincidence, but my body didn't buy it. That's the thing about being alone at night, your logic gets quiet, and your instincts get loud. I picked up my pace, and the whistle stayed with me, repeating those same 3 notes, never rushing, never trailing off, like the person behind me had all the time in the world. Under the next streetlight, I tried to glance back without committing to a full turn. For a split second, I saw a shape at the edge of the light, a taller silhouette, standing where the darkness began just out of range of clear detail. The moment my head moved, the shape moved too, drifting behind a parked SUV so smoothly it looked practiced. The whistle didn't stop. It continued, but softer, as if the person had turned their head away to hide it, or as if they wanted me to question whether I'd really heard it. My throat went dry. I took out my phone and opened the camera not to take a picture, but to use the screen like a mirror. I angled it over my shoulder, and the image filled with grainy darkness and the bright glare of streetlight. For a second I caught the outline again, and then the figure slipped out of frame like it knew exactly what I was doing. The whistle changed slightly, then the same 3 notes, but longer drawn out, almost amused. I kept my face forward and walked faster. I didn't run yet. Running invites a chase, and I wasn't ready to confirm that kind of truth. I went through my options. Call someone, but who picks up at this hour? Call the police, but what do you say? Someone is whistling behind me. Turn around and confront, but that requires turning my back to the dark. The next safest thing I could think of was light and people, and the only place still open on my route was a small 24-hour laundromat on the main road. It wasn't far, but the distance stretched in my mind like a hallway in a nightmare. As I approached the corner that led to the main road, the whistling stopped. Not gradually, instantly, like a switch. My skin prickled. Silence was worse than sound, because it meant repositioning. I crossed the street without meaning to, wanting space from the curb, wanting to make it harder for a car to pull up beside me, and I heard the crunch of snow behind me shift, too faint but present. Then, from somewhere off to my right, the whistle resumed, same 3 notes, except now it wasn't behind me. It was beside me, closer, too close. I whipped my head toward the sound and saw nothing but a line of hedges and a narrow walkway between 2 houses. The hedges were dark and heavy with snow, and the walkway looked like a throat. The whistle came again from that direction, slightly muffled, like the person was partially hidden. That was the moment my body decided for me. I ran. My boots hit the snow hard, slipping once, catching again, and the crunching behind me surged. Urgent now, no longer matching, just chasing. The whistling didn't stop. It followed me, repeating those notes faster, not frantic but steady, as if someone was keeping rhythm to my fear. I reached the main road and almost stumbled into the street. A car passed, headlights flashing over me, and I waved both arms like a lunatic until it slowed. The driver didn't stop, but the moment the road lit up, the footsteps behind me faltered. The whistling stuttered, then stopped completely. I didn't look back. I bolted for the laundromat's bright windows and shoved the door open hard enough that the bell rattled. Warm air and the smell of detergent hit me. 2 people were inside, a tired-looking woman folding clothes, and an older man sitting on a plastic chair, staring at a phone. Both looked up at me like I'd brought the cold in with my face. I went straight to the far wall, where I could see the door and the windows without standing in front of them. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The woman asked, "Are you okay?" I tried to keep my voice even. "Someone was following me," I said. They were whistling. Even as I said it, it sounded strange, like a detail that belonged in a story, not real life. The older man stood up, peered through the window and shrugged. "I don't see anybody." Outside, the sidewalk looked empty. Snow drifted under the streetlights. Cars passed in slow intervals. The world looked normal, and I hated it for that. I stayed inside for 10 minutes, then 15, pretending to scroll on my phone while my ears strained for any hint of those 3 notes. When I finally stepped back outside, I did it like I was leaving a building during a fire drill, head up, eyes scanning route chosen. I decided to call a rideshare from right there, even though my apartment was only a few blocks away, because walking those few blocks suddenly felt like volunteering. While I waited, I stood under the laundromat's bright sign. That's when I heard it again, faint, almost playful 3 notes drifting from across the road. Not behind me. Not close enough to chase. Just far enough to let me know the person was still there, still watching, still capable of turning sound into a leash. I turned my head slowly and saw a figure near a bus stop, partially hidden by the glass shelter, hood up, hands in pockets. They weren't moving toward me. They were just standing there like they had nowhere else to be. The car passed and washed them in light for a second. I still couldn't see a face, but I saw the posture relaxed, patient, and I realized the whistle hadn't been a nervous habit. It had been a choice, a way to control my attention, to make me imagine distance and direction, to make me move the way the person wanted. My ride arrived and I got in so fast I nearly slammed my own fingers in the door. As we pulled away, I looked back through the rear window. The figure at the bus stop lifted a hand. Not a wave, not exactly, but a small motion like adjusting a hood. Then the streetlight flickered and they were just another patch of shadow. I told myself that was the end of it, that the night had produced a single frightening coincidence, and then moved on. But for weeks after, I heard those 3 notes everywhere in the wind, slipping through a cracked window in a kettle starting to boil in the distant chirp of a crosswalk signal. And every time my body reacted before my brain did, tightening, listening, waiting for footsteps to follow, because once you've had someone whistle from the dark like they own your walk home, your ears never stop trying to protect you. I noticed the tree first because it was the only thing on the block that looked alive. Everything else was winter still. Snowbanks like frozen waves, parked cars buried up to their wheel wells, houses dark and quiet with curtains drawn. But the tree, a tall maple near the sidewalk, threw a wide shadow under the streetlight, and that shadow moved in the wind like it was breathing. I was walking home from a late shift, exhausted in that way, where your brain feels like it's running on a low battery too. The air was cold enough to sting the inside of my nose, and the snow squeaked under my boots with each step. I wasn't thinking about danger. I was thinking about my bed, my heater, the fact that I'd forgotten to buy groceries. That's why it took me a second to register the movement near the tree. At first, it looked like a trick of light, a darker shape shifting at the edge of the streetlight circle. I blinked, and the shape slid behind the trunk. Not fast, not frantic. Deliberate like a child playing hide and seek, except there was no laughter in it. My heart kicked once hard, like it had bumped into something. I kept walking because stopping felt like admitting I'd seen it. As I got closer, the tree's trunk blocked my view of the sidewalk beyond it, creating a blind spot that swallowed everything behind. I tried to widen my path, stepping farther from the curb, but the snowbank forced me back toward the sidewalk. The shape moved again, just a shoulder maybe or the curve of a hood, then disappeared behind the trunk. I could feel the hair at the back of my neck lifting. I told myself it was a person waiting for a ride, or someone cutting through a yard, or even a neighbor taking out trash. But who hides behind a tree when someone is walking by? People who belong in the open don't press themselves into shadows. I slowed down, trying to buy time to think. My keys were already threaded between my fingers. I tightened my grip until the metal bit into my skin. The tree was maybe 20 feet away now. The streetlight above it buzzed faintly, and the snow under the light looked cleaner, almost bright. In that brightness, the darkness behind the tree looked deeper, like a door. I decided to test what I was seeing, without making it obvious. I pretended to tie my boot, crouching down under the streetlight's edge. The moment I stopped, the shape behind the tree stopped moving too. I held my breath and listened. No footsteps, no cough, no phone screen glow, nothing. Just wind and the faint hum of power lines. That silence made it worse because it meant the person was controlling more than their body. They were controlling their sound. I stood and started walking again, and the shape shifted immediately, sliding tighter behind the trunk, staying out of sight. I felt a surge of anger, then a hot, irrational flare inside the cold. I hated that my route home had turned into someone else's game. I hated that my body was forced into calculations, distance, light, exit, speed. I was 3 houses away from the tree when I saw something that made my stomach drop footprints. Not mine. At least, not only mine. The sidewalk was dusted with fresh snow, and near the tree the snow had been disturbed in a small semicircle, like someone had been pacing back and forth in the same spot. There were heel marks near the trunk pressed into deeper snow, where the person had stepped off the sidewalk to keep hidden. That meant they hadn't just arrived. They'd been there a while, waiting behind that tree, ready for whoever walked down this block next. My mouth went dry. I scanned the nearest houses for porch lights. Almost all were off. One house, 2 doors past the tree, had a small light glowing in a window, dim but alive. I focused on that light like it was a target. I kept walking, but my pace changed. I wasn't strolling anymore. I was moving with purpose. The tree was close enough now that I could see the rough texture of the bark, the snow clinging to one side, the shadow pooling at its base. I could also see at the very edge of the trunk a sliver of dark fabric, someone's sleeve. The person was pressed tight against the bark, hiding like the trunk could erase them. My pulse hammered so loud I felt it in my teeth. I wanted to bolt, but running past a hidden person means giving them your back. I wanted to confront, but confronting means stepping into their space. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my phone and started recording, holding it low so it looked like I was just looking at the screen. The camera's little red dot appeared, and I angled it toward the tree. The image showed a normal sidewalk, and a normal tree, and a normal block. Nothing jumped out. Then the streetlight flickered just once, the kind of flicker you barely notice in daylight, and in that brief change of illumination the camera caught a partial face peeking around the trunk. Not enough to identify, but enough to confirm. Someone was there, watching me approach. The flicker ended. The face vanished. My chest tightened like a fist. I was close enough now that I could hear the person's breathing, shallow and careful, as if they were trying to breathe silently. I took one step, then another, and as I reached the trunk's shadow, the figure shifted faster, now losing patience, and stepped out from behind the tree into the streetlight. It was a man tall, wearing a dark coat and a beanie pulled low. His hands were empty, but his posture was wrong, angled forward, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was ready to close distance. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," he said, and his voice was calm, like we were the only two people in the world. "You live around here?" My brain screamed at me not to answer. I kept my voice flat. No. It was a lie, but it was the safest lie I had. I kept moving, not stopping, trying to pass him without turning my back. He mirrored my movement, stepping sideways to stay in my path, keeping that same calm pace. "I just need a second," he said, like I owed him time. "My phone died." "Can you?" I cut him off. "No." I stepped around him, and he pivoted, with me closing the space just enough that I could smell him stale smoke, something metallic. He raised one hand, slightly palm out, as if to reassure me. "Don't be like that," he said, and the calm in his voice hardened into irritation like my fear was insulting him. I felt my body shift into survival mode so cleanly, it was almost automatic. I lifted my keys a little, not as a threat, but as a boundary. "Back up," I said. My voice surprised me. It came out stronger than I felt. His eyes flicked to the keys, and for the first time his expression changed. Annoyance, calculation. He didn't back up. He stepped closer. "Relax," he said, and his hand moved toward my arm like he planned to guide me, like he had decided my body was negotiable. I didn't think. I moved. I shoved past him hard shoulder into his coat and sprinted toward the house with the lit window. Snow sprayed under my boots. I heard him curse behind me, and the sound of his shoes hitting the sidewalk was immediate and heavy. He was chasing. I didn't look back. I ran up the nearest steps. Wrong house. Maybe I didn't care, and slammed my fist against the door until my knuckles screamed. The porch light snapped on, flooding everything with harsh yellow. I heard the man's footsteps slow behind me. I hammered again and yelled, "Help, please." The door opened and a woman appeared, startled eyes wide. Before she could speak, I shoved inside, half falling into warmth. "Someone," I gasped, pointing back. The woman's gaze snapped past me to the sidewalk. I turned just enough to see the man standing near the tree again, as if he'd never moved, as if the whole chase had been a misunderstanding. Under the porch light I could see his face clearly for the first time. Ordinary, almost bland. The kind of face that could belong to someone you pass in a grocery store without remembering. He raised both hands, slightly palms out, performing innocence. "She's freaking out," he called toward the doorway, smiling. I just asked for directions. The woman didn't answer him. She pulled me farther inside and shut the door, hard locking it. Through the peephole I watched him stand there for a moment, staring at the house like he was memorizing it. Then he walked back to the tree, not into darkness, but into the exact spot behind the trunk where he'd been hiding. He slipped behind it and disappeared like the tree had swallowed him again. When the police arrived, they found nothing but disturbed snow and a set of footprints near the trunk, the same pacing marks I'd seen. They searched the block, checked alleys, shone flashlights into yards. Nothing. The officer asked me why I thought the man had been hiding there. I told him the truth, because I watched him do it. Because the tree wasn't just a tree to him. It was a curtain. It was cover. It was a place to wait for someone tired and alone to walk past. The officer nodded like he believed me, but belief doesn't change how easy it is for a person to vanish into a winter night. I got a ride home after that, and the next day I walked past that block in daylight, on purpose, like I needed to reclaim it. The tree looked harmless. It was just bark, and branches, and snow. But when I reached it, I noticed something I hadn't seen at night. The trunk had a worn patch on one side. The bark rubbed smoother at shoulder height, like someone had pressed against it often enough to leave a mark. That was when my stomach turned over. It meant it hadn't been a one-time hiding place. It had been a habit, a spot, a routine. And ever since then, every time I walk at night and pass a tree under a streetlight, I don't just look at the sidewalk anymore. I look at the places someone could be standing perfectly still, choosing to be invisible until the moment they decide you've gotten close enough. I only took the park shortcut because I was tired of feeling like the walk home was stealing time from my life. It was late, cold, and the wind had that damp bite that gets under your clothes and settles in your bones. The normal route stayed on the main streets with streetlights, but it looped around the neighborhood in a long, boring arc. The shortcut cut straight through a small park. 10 minutes saved, maybe more, and I'd used it plenty of times in daylight. At night, it looked different. The entrance was a narrow opening between two snowbanks, where the city plow had piled everything up like the path was a tunnel dug into winter. A sign with park rules was posted at an angle, half buried. Beyond it, the path disappeared into trees that stood bare and black against the sky. I told myself it was fine, because there were still streetlights along the park path, spaced out but present, and because snow makes everything brighter, reflecting whatever light exists. I also told myself the fear I'd been carrying from other nights was making me dramatic. I stepped onto the path, and immediately the world went quieter. The snow in the park was softer, less packed than the sidewalk, so my footsteps didn't crunch as loudly. They made a dull, muffled thud, like the ground was swallowing sound. That should have comforted me. It didn't. It felt like I'd walked into a place designed to keep secrets. The first street light inside the park buzzed weakly, casting a pale circle on the path and leaving the trees outside it as thick silhouettes. I walked into that circle and felt the strange relief of being seen, even if only by a broken lamp. Then I walked out of it, and the darkness closed behind me like water. Halfway to the next light, I heard footsteps. Not mine. Behind me on the path, a soft, compressing sound like someone's boots pushing into powdery snow. I stopped, and the sound stopped. I waited, holding my breath. The trees creaked. The wind pushed through branches. No more steps. I told myself it could be an animal, a raccoon, or a stray dog, but the rhythm had been wrong for that. It had been bipedal, controlled. I started walking again, and the steps resumed a beat after mine, the way a shadow follows you. The park swallowed the sound, so I couldn't judge distance, only presence. My pulse started to climb. I told myself to keep going to reach the next streetlight, to not turn around, because turning around would waste time and invite panic. Under the next light, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The path behind me was empty, but the emptiness didn't reassure me. The trees were too close to the trail, and the darkness between them was deep enough to hide a person without effort. If someone was following, they didn't need to be on the path. They could be pacing me 10 feet into the trees where the light couldn't reach. The thought made my stomach twist. I kept walking faster now. The steps behind me kept pace, still soft, still patient. Then I heard something else, a faint clicking like a lighter being flicked without catching, or like a twig snapping. It came from the tree line to my right. I glanced that way and saw nothing but thin trunks and shadow. I forced myself to look ahead again and focus on the exit. The park path curved slightly, and ahead I could see the glow of the final street light near the far entrance. It looked like a small moon floating above the snow. I aimed for it and sped up my breath, turning to steam inside my scarf. The footsteps behind me sped up too, and for the first time they sounded closer, not matching distance anymore. Closing. I felt heat rise in my chest, an angry panic. I was being herded. The path narrowed near a cluster of bushes. Snow weighed the branches down, so they hung low like hands. I could hear my own boots slip slightly on an icy patch, and behind me a heavier slip, followed by a quick recovery. That confirmed it a person. I was not alone. I reached the last streetlight and stopped under it, forcing myself to turn fully because I needed to see what was happening. The cold air hit my lungs like glass. The path behind me was empty again. No one standing there, no figure running, nothing. Just my footprints pressed into the snow. And then from the right side of the path, from within the trees, a voice said softly, "Hey." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't far. It was close enough that it felt like the word landed on my neck. I spun toward the sound and saw a shape between two trees, barely separated from the darkness by the faint edge of light. A man stepped forward slightly, not fully into the streetlight, but close enough that I could make out a hood and the pale curve of a face. He held something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what. His posture was casual, almost lazy, like he'd been waiting there a while. "You got a light?" he asked, and his tone was friendly in the way that makes your skin crawl because, friendliness is being used as a tool. "No," I said immediately. My voice came out sharp. He chuckled. "Come on," he said. "Just a second." He took a step toward the path. I stepped back, keeping the streetlight behind me so I wouldn't be swallowed by darkness again. "I said no," I repeated. The man sighed like I was being unreasonable. That's when I saw the second shape. Not a person stepping out dramatically, just a shift in the shadows farther back, another set of shoulders moving behind a tree. The park wasn't holding one stranger. It was holding two. My stomach dropped so hard I felt like I might throw up. The first man kept talking, as if nothing had changed. "Where you headed?" he asked, still casual. "You live close." My brain screamed at me to run, but the far exit was behind them, not behind me. The direction I needed to go was the direction the voices were coming from. The main road behind me was a longer walk, but it was open lit, and it meant putting distance between me and these shapes. I made the decision instantly. I turned and ran back the way I came, back into the park, back through the dark stretches between streetlights, because at least behind me was open space, not men positioned like gatekeepers. As soon as I ran, I heard them move. Footsteps hit the path behind me, louder now, no longer trying to hide. I didn't look back. I ran from circle of light to circle of light, lungs burning, legs slipping on patches of ice, hands numb. Behind me, the footsteps stayed, sometimes one set, sometimes two, like they were taking turns or spreading out. The park's darkness felt different now, less like a lack of light and more like a thing with teeth. I reached the first entrance and burst out onto the street, nearly colliding with a parked car. I didn't stop. I ran toward the main road, where I could see the glow of traffic lights and the occasional passing headlights. The moment I hit the open street, the footsteps behind me changed. They slowed. They faded. I risked a glance back and saw nothing but the park entrance and the path disappearing into trees. For a second I thought I was safe. Then I saw them standing just inside the park boundary, two silhouettes under the first weak streetlight, not chasing anymore, not trying to follow me into the open, just watching. The first man raised a hand slightly, not waving, more like acknowledging a game well played. Then both shapes stepped backward into the trees, swallowed by darkness as easily as they'd appeared. I made it home shaking so hard I couldn't fit my key into the lock. I kept replaying the moment I'd chosen the shortcut, the way the park had quieted my footsteps and hidden theirs, the way the streetlights created islands where you think you're safe but you're only visible. The next day in daylight, the park looked harmless again. Kids' footprints crossed the path. Dog tracks dotted the snow. The trees looked like trees, not hiding places. But once you've had strangers use darkness like a wall, you stop seeing parks as green space. You start seeing them as geometry, blind spots, choke points, places where a friendly question like, "You got a light?" can become the first step in a plan you were never supposed to notice until it was too late. Fog makes the world feel unfinished, like someone erased the edges of everything and left only what you're meant to walk into. That night, the air was thick enough that street lights didn't shine. They bled. Their yellow glow spread into the mist in soft halos, and beyond each halo there was nothing but grey. Snow had fallen earlier and melted into slush, so the sidewalk was wet and quiet, and my footsteps didn't crunch as much as they whispered. I was walking home from the late bus, irritated and tired, thinking about nothing more dangerous than a hot shower. The fog was so dense that I couldn't see the next intersection from where I stood. Cars moved slowly, appearing out of nowhere. Headlights diffused into pale beams that made the mist look like smoke. It was the kind of weather that forces you to rely on sound, and that's what scared me later, how easily sound can be controlled. I noticed the shadow first, not behind me, but ahead, a darker shape moving within the fog's grey. At first I thought it was a mailbox or a trash can placed near the curb. Then it shifted. A person. The figure moved across the sidewalk and disappeared into a patch of thicker fog near a row of hedges. I kept walking, telling myself it was just someone else heading home, but my instincts kept tugging at my attention like a sleeve. Under the next streetlight, I saw something that made me slow down my breath. Not mine alone. In the mist, my own breath should have disappeared immediately, but the air was so saturated that it lingered white and curling. And just ahead, drifting into the streetlight's halo, was another plume of breath that wasn't synced with mine. Someone had just exhaled in front of me. That meant I wasn't alone in the fog. I was walking into someone's space. I stopped under the streetlight and listened. The fog swallowed distance, but it didn't swallow everything. I heard a faint scuff, like a shoe turning on wet concrete, and then silence. I told myself to turn around and take another route, but the street behind me was a long stretch of nothing, and I couldn't see if anyone was there either. Fog doesn't let you retreat. It just changes which unseen space you're walking into. I started walking again, slower, cautious. My phone was in my hand. Screen dimmed to save battery thumb, hovering over the emergency call option. The fog thickened between streetlights, and the world narrowed to the few feet around me. That's when the shadow appeared again, this time to my left, moving parallel behind the hedges. I couldn't see a person clearly, just a darker band sliding within the grey like something was tracking me from behind cover. I stopped. The shadow stopped. I moved again. The shadow moved. The logic was undeniable. Someone was pacing me using the fog like a curtain. My heart started beating harder, and I realized I had been holding my shoulders tight as if bracing for a hand to land there. I picked up my pace, heading toward a busier road where I knew there would be at least a few late-night cars. The shadow kept pace. Under the next streetlight, I dared to look toward the hedges, and for a split second, I saw the outline of a face, just a pale oval in the grey eyes, darker than the mist, before it slid back out of view. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't my imagination. The person behind the hedges wanted me to know they could appear and vanish at will. I forced myself not to run. Running in fog is dangerous. You can slip, you can miss hazards, you can run into someone you didn't see. But the urge to sprint was so strong it made my legs twitch. I kept walking quickly, controlled, scanning the edge of the sidewalk for driveways or open gates where someone could step out. The fog made every driveway look like a mouth. Then from behind me I heard footsteps. Not close, but distinct, wet steps on concrete, steady and careful. I froze. The sound stopped. For a heartbeat, the only thing I heard was my own breathing. Then the footsteps resumed closer. I realized what was happening there. Were two of them now. One using the hedges, one behind me on the sidewalk. My throat tightened. I didn't look back. I couldn't. In fog, turning your head doesn't give you information. It gives you panic. Instead, I stepped off the sidewalk and onto a driveway under a streetlight, making myself visible to any passing car, hoping the change in position would disrupt them. The footsteps behind me paused. The shadow behind the hedges paused too. For a moment everything held still, like the fog itself was watching. Then a voice came from the hedge line, low and conversational, as if we were neighbors chatting over a fence. "You lost." The way he said it made my skin crawl, because it wasn't concern. It was amusement. "No," I said louder than I meant to. "I'm fine." I kept walking, staying in the streetlight as long as possible before stepping into the next grey gap. The footsteps behind me started again immediately, and now they were closer, no longer careful about distance. I could hear the slight drag of a sole, the soft slap of wet rubber. Another voice, different, farther back, said something I couldn't make out, and the first voice laughed quietly. That laughter felt like someone closing a door. I made a decision in a rush. I was going to the nearest place with light and people, even if it meant detouring. I remembered a small diner that stayed open late for truckers. It was 5 minutes off my route, but it was a beacon in my mind. I turned toward it, and the footsteps behind me turned too, confirming again that they were tracking me, not simply walking the same way. The fog was thicker on that side street, and the streetlights were fewer. I could feel the space closing. The footsteps sped up. The shadow behind the hedges moved faster, and for a moment it broke from cover. A dark figure stepping onto the sidewalk ahead, blocking my path. I stopped so abruptly my foot slid on slush. The figure stood there, just a silhouette in fog, and I couldn't see his hands. Behind me, the footsteps continued, and now they were very close. I felt trapped between two unseen points, and the fog made it impossible to judge how far I could run before collision. That's when headlights appeared, through the mist, approaching slowly from the main road. A car, maybe a rideshare, maybe just someone driving. The light spread across the fog like a spill, and in that brief illumination the figure ahead shifted back, retreating into grey. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. The car rolled closer, and I did something that felt humiliating but necessary. I stepped into the street and waved both arms. The car slowed, and the driver honked, startled. I rushed to the passenger window and blurted, "Please, can you call someone? Someone's following me." The driver's face was blurry behind fogged glass, but I saw his eyes widen. He looked past me into the fog, then immediately locked his doors, click, click, before rolling the window down a crack. "Get in," he said, and unlocked the passenger side. I didn't argue. I yanked the door open and climbed into heat and stale air freshener, heart pounding so hard my vision shimmered. As the driver pulled away, I looked back. The fog swallowed everything behind us. No silhouette, no footsteps, no proof. Just the soft glow of streetlights, bleeding into grey. I thanked the driver too many times, voice shaking. He dropped me at my apartment building and waited until I got inside. When I reached my unit and shut the door, the silence was enormous. I stood there, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for voices, behind walls, for any sound that meant the fog had followed me home. Nothing. But even days later, when the weather cleared, I found myself looking at the edges of things, hedges, fences, alleyways, as if fog still hid someone there. Because once you've seen a shadow move with you in weather that erases the world, you realize how little you need to be hunted. Sometimes all it takes is a night when the air is thick enough to hide a person's face, and thin enough to carry their footsteps right to the back of your neck. The first time he asked me for the time, I almost laughed, because we were standing under a streetlight bright enough to read a newspaper, and my phone screen was glowing in my hand. It was winter cold, the kind that makes your fingers clumsy and your thoughts feel slow, and I was halfway home from the bus stop, hood up, scarf pulled high, trying to get inside before the wind turned my face numb. He stepped out from the shadow of a parked car, like he'd been there the whole time, not rushing, not startling, just appearing in my path, with the casual confidence of someone who assumes you'll make room for him. "Hey," he said, friendly breath, puffing white. "Sorry, you got the time." His voice was normal. His smile was normal. His hands were empty and held slightly away from his body like he was showing he wasn't a threat. That's what made it hard to justify the little alarm that flared in my chest. I glanced at my screen. 1, 2, 3, 8, I said, and immediately regretted giving him anything precise, because precise details feel like permission. "Appreciated," he said. My phone died. He gave a small shrug, as if that explained everything. He didn't move away, though. He stayed standing too close to the sidewalk, angled in the same direction I needed to go, like we were about to start walking together. I nodded once, a tight, polite motion, and started forward. For 3 steps I heard nothing but my own boots on crusted snow. Then I heard his boots, too, falling in behind mine at a comfortable social distance, like he'd decided we were now sharing a route. I told myself maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he really was just a guy with a dead phone heading home. But then, without any pause, he started talking. Not small talk with space for me to answer more, like he was filling the air so I couldn't hear anything else. "Crazy cold tonight," he said. "You live around here?" I gave the safest answer I could. "Not far." He chuckled softly like that was cute. "Same. I'm just over that way." His footsteps stayed behind mine, steady, unhurried. I sped up slightly. He sped up too. I slowed. He slowed. The matching wasn't perfect like a mirror, but it was responsive, and that responsiveness made my skin tighten. I kept my eyes forward, scanning for any porch lights, any movement, any car that might pass close enough to make me feel less alone. The street was dead. Houses dark. Snowbanks high. Under the next streetlight, I tried to change the pattern without making it obvious. I drifted toward the curb and then crossed to the other side of the street, as if I suddenly remembered I needed to be over there. The man hesitated for half a beat, just enough to show choice, and then he crossed too, a few yards behind. Still following, still quiet. My mouth went dry. I didn't want to run because running gives someone a reason to chase, and I didn't want to confront because confronting means stopping. I kept walking and forced my voice to stay neutral. "You said your phone died." "Yeah," he said. "Happens right." He laughed again, and I heard something in it that didn't match the situation, like he was enjoying how normal he sounded. "You got a charger I could borrow?" "No," I said immediately. "I don't." He hummed, like he was thinking. "It's cool," he said. "I'll figure it out." Then he asked another question, softer. "You alone?" My shoulders went rigid under my coat. "Yeah," I said, and then hated myself for answering at all. He made a sound like sympathy. "That's rough," he said. "Not safe out here." The irony was so sharp it felt like a joke someone else was telling. We walked another half block. I could feel him behind me like heat. I tried to use my phone as a lifeline, but the battery percentage had dropped faster. In the cold 11%, then 10%, and the screen dimmed as if it was tired too. I opened my messages, thumb hovering over a friend's name, but my hands were shaking and I knew I might fumble the call. The man behind me cleared his throat. "What's your name?" he asked, like it was casual. I didn't answer. I turned that silence into a wall. He didn't like it. I could hear the shift in his pace, the way he closed a little distance. "Come on," he said lightly. "I'm just being friendly." I kept walking. Under the next street light, I risked a glance at the snow. My footprints were clean and clear, and behind them his prints followed in a line that stayed just off to one side. Not stepping in mine, but close enough that it looked intentional. He was choosing the same rhythm, the same route, the same spacing. I decided to test one final time. Ahead was a corner that would take me toward my building, but there was also a lit convenience store, 2 blocks the other way. I turned toward the store without hesitation, as if that had always been my plan. I didn't look back. I just listened. For 1 second I heard his steps pause. Then they turned with me. He turned with me. My chest tightened hard. "Oh," he said, like he was amused. "You're going that way." I didn't answer. I walked faster toward the store's glow. He kept pace. "You don't gotta be scared," he said. "I'm not following you. I'm just walking." I wanted to say, then stop walking when I stop, but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I was afraid. We reached the convenience store parking lot, and I walked straight to the front door like I was going inside. At the last second, I didn't. I pivoted sharply and stepped back out of the light, moving along the side of the building where there were security cameras and a big window looking into the cashier area. I pretended to check my phone while I watched my reflection and the sidewalk behind me. The man slowed near the entrance, hesitating in the bright rectangle of light. For the first time he looked uncertain, like he hadn't expected me to choose a place with cameras and witnesses. He glanced at the window, then at me, and the smile slipped a little. He walked closer anyway, but not too close, maintaining the performance. "See," he said, "we're both just out here." I finally spoke, letting my voice go flat. "Stop following me." His smile returned sharper now. "I'm not following you," he said, and his tone carried a mild irritation, like I'd accused him of something rude. "I asked you for the time. That's it." He shifted his weight and looked toward the street as if he might leave. Then he added almost conversationally, "What building you in?" The question landed like a hand on my throat. "None of your business," I said. He laughed softly. "Relax," he said. "I'm just curious." He took a step closer, and I noticed something I hadn't before. His eyes weren't darting around like a nervous stranger. They were steady, focused, watching my face for reactions. I stepped backward until I was directly under the camera by the door and raised my phone like I was calling someone. My battery flashed 6%. I hit the emergency call shortcut anyway, not caring if it seemed dramatic. The screen tried to connect. The man's expression flickered, annoyance now, not amusement. "Really?" he said under his breath, and he backed away 1 step, like he didn't want to be recorded doing this. The call failed. Call cannot be completed. My phone was freezing up. I felt heat behind my eyes. The man watched me struggle with the screen, then said very softly, "You should have just kept walking." The way he said it was calm, almost kind, and it chilled me more than shouting would have. I pushed into the store. The bell jingled. The cashier looked up, and I went straight to the counter, voice tight. "There's a guy outside," I said. He followed me here. The cashier's eyes shifted to the glass. "Which guy?" he asked, because of course, in a normal world, people don't understand until they see it. I turned slightly and looked through the window. The man was standing on the sidewalk near the streetlight, just far enough away to look like someone waiting. When he saw me look, he lifted one hand and pointed at his wrist like a joke, like he was reminding me why we were in this conversation. Time. Then he smiled and walked away into the dark, unhurried, as if he'd never been denied anything in his life. The cashier offered to call the police. I nodded, but by the time anyone would arrive, he would be gone. That's the part that stayed with me afterward, how little he did. A question, a walk, a few polite sentences. No threats anyone else could hear. Nothing that fit neatly into crime. Yet the next day when I walked the route in daylight, I noticed something I hadn't seen that night. The streetlight where he first appeared was directly across from a small gap between houses, a narrow path that cut behind the block like a path. Shortcut, only locals would know. He hadn't stepped out randomly. He positioned himself, and ever since then, whenever someone asks me for the time at night, my stomach flips, not because time is dangerous, but because I learned how easily a harmless question can be used as a hook to attach a stranger to your walk home. By the time my night shift ends, the world already feels like it belongs to someone else. The lights are different. The streets are quieter. Even my own thoughts move slower, like my brain is still working under fluorescent bulbs while my body is trying to navigate winter darkness. That night, I clocked out just after 2:00 a.m., the kind of hour that makes every storefront look abandoned and every passing car feel deliberate. I worked at a small medical lab on the edge of town, and the bus schedule was sparse, so my last stop always left me with a 10-minute walk through a neighborhood that wasn't dangerous in daylight, but felt wide open and empty at night. Snow had fallen earlier and been partially cleared, leaving the sidewalks slick in places, crunchy in others. My breath came out in hard white bursts. My gloves smelled faintly, like disinfectant. I remember checking my phone as I stepped off the bus. 27% battery, enough to call someone, not enough to waste. The street lamp at the stop flickered, buzzing like it was tired too. I started walking, keeping my head up, keys in hand, telling myself to stay calm because calm keeps you smart. For the first few minutes everything was normal, quiet, cold, empty. Then I noticed the car. It wasn't right behind me. It was far enough back that if I turned my head, I couldn't immediately tell if it was following or just traveling the same direction. But it moved strangely slower than it should have, and when it reached the intersection behind me, it didn't continue straight. It turned, then reappeared, a block over on the parallel street, headlights drifting through the gaps between houses, like pale eyes. I told myself I was tired and imagining patterns. Night shift fatigue does that. It makes you see movement and assume meaning. Still, my instincts kept tallying what my brain wanted to dismiss. I passed under a streetlight, and my shadow stretched long across the snow, and for a moment I thought I saw another shadow lagging behind it, but when I looked, there was only darkness. I kept walking. A gust of wind pushed fine snow across the road in thin sheets, making the asphalt look like moving water. The car appeared again, this time closer, rolling slowly at the far end of the block, then turning away before it reached me. It wasn't approaching like a normal driver. It was orbiting. I changed my route slightly, choosing a street that added a minute, but kept me closer to main traffic. The car turned too, again, not immediately, but soon enough to keep me in its vicinity. My mouth went dry. I pulled out my phone and opened a chat with my coworker, the only person I trusted to answer at this hour. I typed, "Walking home. Weird car near me." My fingers fumbled because of the cold. The message sent, but no response popped up. I didn't want to look down at my phone too long. I wanted to keep my attention on the dark. At the next corner there was a stretch with no streetlights, a long gap where the houses were set back and the trees leaned over the road like ribs. I hesitated because the lit route would take me past a small all-night donut shop on the main road, but it was farther. The unlit route was quicker. Normally I would choose quick. That night I chose light. I turned toward the main road, and that's when the car finally committed. It rolled up behind me, not fast, just close enough that the sound of tires on snow became distinct, and the headlights painted my legs bright against the sidewalk. The driver didn't honk, didn't call out, just stayed there, creeping along at walking speed as if testing how long I would tolerate it. My heartbeat started to thud in my ears. He sped up. The car sped up too, keeping the same distance. I crossed the street. It crossed behind me. The road was empty, and the sound of the engine felt loud in the cold, like the car was a machine built to remind me how small I was. I kept walking toward the donut shop's neon sign, a pink glow in the distance that suddenly felt like a lighthouse. The car crept. My phone vibrated once my coworker finally responding. "Want me to call you?" I typed back fast. "Yes." "No." As I did, the car's headlights dipped slightly, and for a moment the driver's silhouette became visible through the windshield, just a dark shape behind glass. My phone rang. I answered immediately, voice tight. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "I'm almost at the donut shop." I said it loudly on purpose, making sure the driver could hear that another person was now connected to me, that I wasn't fully isolated anymore. My coworker asked, "What's going on?" I didn't want to ramble. "Car following," I said. "Stay on the phone." The car slowed, then surged forward to pull alongside me. The passenger window lowered a few inches. Warm air spilled out. A man's voice said, casual, like we were neighbors, "You okay?" The words were simple, but the situation made them feel like bait. I didn't answer him. I kept walking, eyes forward, and spoke into my phone instead. "A car just pulled next to me," I said loud. My coworker's voice sharpened. "Where are you exactly?" I named the cross street. The driver chuckled under his breath, like I was being dramatic. "You don't have to ignore me," he said, and his tone had that edge of entitlement that makes your skin tighten, like my fear was rude. I kept walking. The donut shop was closer now, bright windows visible. The car rolled forward again, turned into a side street, then reappeared at the next intersection, cutting me off at an angle so the headlights pinned the sidewalk. The driver didn't block me fully, but he made it clear he could. My stomach dropped. My coworker said, "I'm calling the police right now. Keep moving. Don't go home." I nodded even though she couldn't see it. I stepped off the sidewalk toward the donut shop's parking lot, aiming for the brightest area. The car hesitated, then followed, slowly turning into the lot behind me. That's when my exhaustion turned into pure clarity. If I let this car follow me to my building, I was giving the driver information I couldn't take back. I walked straight into the donut shop. The bell above the door jingled. Heat and sugar smell hit my face. 2 employees behind the counter looked up, surprised. I didn't waste time. "There's a car that followed me into your lot," I said. "Can I stay here? My friend is calling the police." One of them, an older woman with tired eyes, immediately nodded and gestured me behind the counter area like she'd seen fear before and didn't need details. I stood near the back where I could see the front windows, without being in them. Outside, the car sat idling near the entrance, headlights off now, just a dark shape. The driver didn't get out. He just waited. The waiting felt like pressure. My coworker stayed on the phone, voice steady, telling me the police were on the way, telling me to keep describing what I saw. After a minute, the car rolled forward slow and stopped directly in front of the shop as if the driver wanted me to see the vehicle clearly. I tried to read the plate through the glass, but it was smeared with salt and shadow. The driver's head turned slightly toward the window. I couldn't see a face, just the idea of being watched. Then, as if on cue, a police cruiser appeared on the main road, lights flashing briefly before turning into the lot. The dark car moved immediately, not speeding, not panicking, just pulling out and leaving with calm efficiency. The officer arrived and asked me questions, description, direction, any words said. I answered, but the adrenaline was already draining, leaving me shaking with exhaustion. The officer offered to escort me home, and I accepted, because pride is useless at 230A. In winter. In the back of the cruiser, with heat blasting, I felt the delayed impact of what had happened. How easily a normal walk can be turned into a corridor. How quickly fatigue can become vulnerability. How a stranger in a car can decide to spend part of their night circling you like you're a problem to solve. When we reached my building, the officer waited until I was inside the locked entryway. I thanked him and rode the elevator up, hands still clenched around my keys. In my apartment, I turned on every light and stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. It was empty, calm, almost beautiful under fresh snow. That's the cruelest part. The world looks peaceful, even when someone has just tried to make you disappear inside it. The next night, when I stepped off the bus after work again, I caught myself scanning for slow headlights before I even started walking. My body learned the lesson faster than my mind. Night shift doesn't just change your sleep schedule. It changes the way you understand distance, light, and silence. And it teaches you that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't a dark alley. Sometimes it's the long, ordinary stretch between work and home where someone decides you look tired enough to be worth following. The first time he offered me a ride, I thought it was just awkward kindness, the kind that shows up in winter when people see someone walking and assume they're doing you a favor. It was cold enough that my eyelashes felt stiff, and the sidewalk was a patchwork of shoveled concrete and glassy ice. I was halfway home, hood cinched tight, when a dark SUV rolled up beside me at a slow crawl, tires whispering over slush. The passenger window lowered an inch. Warm air spilled out, smelling like coffee and old cologne. A man's voice said friendly, "Hey, you want a ride? It's freezing." I shook my head without looking at him. No thanks. The SUV kept pace anyway, staying right next to me like we were walking together. "Come on," he said, still smiling in his voice. "I'm just being nice." I stepped farther from the curb. "I'm good." After a few seconds, he let the car drift forward and pulled away, turning at the end of the block. I told myself that was it. People ask. You say no. Life continues. Then it happened again, 2 nights later. Same street, same time window, same slow approach. The SUV appeared from behind, like it had been waiting for me to turn onto that block. This time he didn't start with hello. He started with familiarity. "Hey, it's you again," he said, like we'd met at a party. "You sure you don't want to ride?" My stomach tightened, because I hadn't told anyone my routine, but here he was acting like he'd learned it. I kept walking. No. The SUV crept alongside me for half a block, engine idling like a patient animal. "I see you out here a lot," he said. "It's not safe." The way he said safe made my skin crawl because he was the only danger on the street. He laughed softly when I didn't answer. "What? You don't trust people anymore?" I didn't look at him. I didn't give him my face. I just kept walking and counted streetlights like checkpoints. Under the next pool of light, I risked a glance at the window. I saw a profile, male, maybe mid-30s, baseball cap, low jaw tight, ordinary enough to be anyone. That's the problem with ordinary. It blends. The SUV sped up and pulled ahead, and for a moment relief washed through me. Then it made a slow right turn and disappeared. 30 seconds later it came back from the opposite direction, headlights sweeping across the sidewalk, and it slowed again right beside me. "See," he said. "I can drop you off. 5 minutes. You don't gotta do this." The repetition started to feel like a test. How many times would he ask before I slipped and accepted? How many no's did I have before he decided they didn't count? I changed my route after that, taking different streets, leaving work 5 minutes earlier or later, calling friends on the nose. Phone while I walked, doing everything that people tell you to do when you're trying to stay safe. And still a week later he found me. It was snowing lightly, the kind of fine, dry snow that floats instead of falling. I stepped out of the building and immediately saw the SUV across the street, parked with its lights off, engine running just enough to fog the windows. It was positioned like it was waiting for a bus, except there was no stop there. The SUV didn't move when I looked at it. It just sat there, quiet. My throat went dry. I walked the opposite direction toward a more lit route, telling myself he couldn't follow without making it obvious. The SUV pulled out smoothly and rolled behind me at a distance, not close enough to look like a threat, but close enough that I could hear the tires. When I turned onto a side street, it turned too. When I sped up, it sped up. He wasn't asking anymore. He was shadowing. I pulled out my phone and started a voice call to my sister. It rang. No answer. My battery indicator flashed lower than I expected. The cold was draining it fast. I left a voicemail anyway, speaking loudly, naming the street I was on, saying, "If I don't call you back in 5 minutes, something is wrong." My own voice sounded unreal in the quiet snow. The SUV crept closer. The window lowered. "You don't have to do all that," he said, his friendliness thinning into irritation like my precautions were insulting him. "I told you I'm just trying to help." I didn't answer. I turned toward a block with more houses, more porch lights, more chances that someone might be awake. The SUV rolled ahead and stopped at the next intersection, angled in a way that forced me to walk closer to the passenger side if I wanted to continue straight. That was the first time I felt truly trapped, because the street behind me was empty, and the street ahead was pinched by the car's position. I stopped under a streetlight and stared at the snow in front of my boots, as if thinking hard. My heart hammered. The SUV's engine purred. The man's voice came again, calmer now, like he'd decided on a different approach. "Look, I'm sorry if I freaked you out," he said. "I just hate seeing you walk. My sister used to walk home like this. Something happened to her." The story landed like bait. I didn't take it. "No," I said, and my voice shook, despite me trying to keep it flat. "Please leave me alone." There was a pause. Then he sighed, long and exaggerated, like I was exhausting him. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I get it." The SUV rolled backwards slightly, making space. Relief surged, and that's when he did it. He opened the passenger door. Not fully, just a crack like he wanted me to notice the option, like a stage direction. Warm light spilled onto the snow. "Just get in for a second," he said softly. "I'll take you right to your door. You can even text someone my plate." My stomach turned. He wasn't offering safety. He was offering control. I took 2 steps backward, without taking my eyes off the SUV. "No," I said again. The door opened wider. The man's tone changed almost imperceptibly, from coaxing to certainty. "Come on," he said, and it wasn't a suggestion anymore. That's when I ran. I ran toward the nearest house, with a porch light on, boots, slipping breath ripping out of me in clouds. Behind me, the SUV's engine revved, and the passenger door slammed. Tires spun briefly on snow. The SUV surged forward, then stopped. Again, stopped. Because if he chased too hard in a residential street, someone might notice. And predators hate witnesses more than they hate no. I hit the porch steps of a random house, and pounded on the door, like I was trying to break through wood. A dog started barking inside. A light snapped on in an upstairs window. The SUV idled at the corner, watching. When the door finally opened a crack, I blurted, "Someone's following me. Please." The homeowner, a man in sweatpants, eyes wide with sleep, looked past me, saw the SUV, and his face sharpened into something alert. He pulled me inside and shut the door hard. Through the window beside the entryway, I watched the SUV sit there for a few seconds longer, engine steady as if the driver was deciding whether to gamble. Then it rolled away, slowly turning the corner without urgency, like he knew he could come back another night. The homeowner called the police while I sat on a chair, shaking so hard my teeth clicked. When the officers arrived, the SUV was gone. Of course it was. Without a plate, without a clear description, all I had was a pattern. The same car, the same voice, the same repeated offer that wasn't really an offer at all. The next day, I walked that route in daylight and tried to make myself feel stupid for being scared. The street looked harmless. The snow looked clean. And that's when I noticed tire tracks in the slush near my building. Fresh wide, the kind an SUV makes. And right beside them footprints that led to the spot where the driver would have stood if he wanted to watch the door. He hadn't just found me by accident. He'd waited for me. After that, I stopped thinking of, "Do you want a ride?" as a question. I started hearing it as a plan, repeated, until you're tired enough, cold enough, or alone enough to say yes. I knew something was wrong the moment the bus doors folded shut, and I realized I was the only one who got off at that stop except for him. It was late winter, late the kind of night where the cold makes the air feel metallic and the streetlights look too bright against black sky. The bus was mostly empty, just a handful of people, spaced out faces lit blue by phones. I sat near the middle, earbuds in, watching my reflection flicker in the window as we passed dark yards and snowbanks piled high. 2 stops before mine, a man got on. He wasn't loud. He didn't stare. He wore a dark jacket and a knit cap pulled low. He moved toward the back and sat diagonally behind me. I noticed him because the bus was quiet enough that every movement felt like a choice, and his felt deliberate. When my stop came, I stood and walked toward the door, telling myself not to be paranoid. The doors opened with a hiss. Cold air poured in like water. I stepped down onto the snow-dusted curb. Behind me, footsteps hit the steps too. He got off, right after me. The bus pulled away, red light shrinking into the distance, and suddenly the world was very quiet. No engine noise, no other passengers. Just me, him, and the long stretch of sidewalk leading into a neighborhood of sleeping houses. I turned left toward my building. I heard his boots crunch behind me. I told myself maybe he lived nearby. Plenty of people get off at the same stop. But then I did a small test without thinking. I crossed the street at the first opportunity, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see what he'd do. He crossed too. Not immediately, but within seconds, matching my direction like a correction. My stomach tightened. I kept walking faster. His footsteps stayed behind me, steady, neither closing nor falling back, like he understood that distance management is part of the game. Under the next streetlight, I pulled my phone out and pretended to check a message while angling the screen like a mirror. The image caught a partial view, a man in dark clothes, head down, hands in pockets, walking with calm purpose. He wasn't looking at houses. He was looking at me. I shoved the phone away and kept moving, my breath coming out in sharp bursts. The sidewalk ahead narrowed, where snow had been pushed into a ridge, forcing me closer to the street. The street itself was empty. No cars, no passing headlights to make me feel visible. I could hear only my boots and his, and the sound felt like a metronome counting down. He didn't speak at first. That silence was worse than any line, because it meant he didn't need words to attach himself to my route. When he did speak, his voice was mild, almost polite. "Hey," he said. "You dropped something, I didn't stop." "No," I said, without turning. He chuckled softly, like my answer didn't matter. "Just checking," he said. His footsteps stayed steady. I tried another tactic. I slowed down abruptly, pretending to tie my shoe. The moment I crouched, his steps stopped too. Not far, close enough that I could feel the presence behind me like heat against my back. I stayed crouched for a second longer than necessary, just to see if he'd pass. He didn't. He waited. That confirmed everything. A normal person walking home would keep going, maybe glance back awkwardly, maybe create distance. He chose to hover. I stood and started walking again, and his steps resumed instantly. The cold air felt thinner. My hands were already wrapped around my keys in my pocket, the metal biting into my palm. My building was only a few blocks away, but now the idea of leading him there made my stomach turn. If he learned the door code, if he learned the floor, if he learned which unit, those are pieces of information you can't take back. I needed a detour somewhere, lit and public. There was a small ATM kiosk near a grocery store on the main road, and the store's vestibule stayed bright even after closing. I turned toward it without hesitation. Behind me, his footsteps paused for half a beat, then followed the turn. He followed. The certainty hit me like a punch. I didn't run. I forced myself to walk fast and control because running turns you into prey, and I didn't want to hand him that switch. The vestibule came into view, glass doors glowing under fluorescent light. I stepped inside and let the warm air hit my face. The place smelled like cleaning solution and old cardboard. I didn't go deeper into the store. It was closed. but the vestibule had big windows facing the street and a security camera mounted above the entrance. I stood under that camera and pretended to scroll on my phone while watching the reflection in the glass. He approached the door and stopped outside just beyond the automatic sensor, standing where the light from inside hit him but didn't fully expose his face. He looked ordinary. That was the most frightening part. If you passed him at noon, you wouldn't remember him at 1201. He stared through the glass with a neutral expression, like he was waiting for a bus that would never come. I dialed a friend and put the phone to my ear immediately. It rang. No answer. My battery dropped another % in the cold. I tried again, this time calling my building security line. It went to voicemail. Behind the glass, the man raised his hand and tapped lightly on the door once like a polite knock. The sound was small, but it made my whole body tense. I didn't move toward him. I didn't acknowledge him. I kept my back to the camera and my face angled, so it could capture me clearly like I was building evidence with posture. He tapped again, slightly harder. Then he smiled. Not friendly, not warm, just the thin smile of someone enjoying your calculation. He mouthed something I couldn't hear through glass. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He looked away from me and down the street in the direction my building was, as if confirming the route, as if the detour hadn't erased the information. He could still follow me when I left. The automatic doors slid open suddenly because a car pulled into the lot and triggered the sensor from the side. The man didn't step in. He stepped back like he didn't want to cross that threshold while a vehicle was nearby. The driver, a woman, walked toward the ATM without looking up. I made a decision that felt desperate, but necessary. I walked straight to her and said quietly, "I'm sorry. That man followed me from the bus stop. Can you please pretend you know me?" The woman's eyes widened, then sharpened. She glanced toward the glass, saw him, and her expression changed into something protective. "Hey," she said loudly immediately, like we were old friends. "Oh my God, I haven't seen you in forever." She touched my arm lightly in anchor and kept her body positioned between me and the door. The man's smile faded. He looked at her, then back at me, and for a moment I saw irritation flicker across his face like a crack in paint. He didn't like witnesses. He didn't like variables. He stayed outside for another few seconds, pretending to check his phone even though I had never seen him take one out. Then he turned and walked away down the sidewalk unhurried. The woman stayed with me, asking questions, calling someone, insisting on driving me home. I accepted. In her car, heat blasting, I looked back through the rear window as we pulled out of the lot. Under a streetlight halfway down the block, the man stood near a signpost, watching the road like he was deciding whether to continue on foot or switch to another plan. When our headlights swept over him, he didn't flinch. He just raised a hand and adjusted his knit cap, calm as a person, waiting for the right timing. The woman drove me all the way to my building and waited until I was inside the locked lobby. Only when the elevator doors closed did my body start shaking the delayed tremor of adrenaline. The next day, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe he lived nearby, that maybe I'd misread the whole thing. But that night when I stepped off the bus again, at a different stop 2 blocks away, I saw him through the bus window before I even stood up. Same dark jacket, same knit cap, sitting 2 rows behind head, angled toward the door as if he already knew where I'd be. And that's when I understood the worst part. Sometimes you're not being followed because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes you're being followed because you're in the same place at the same time every night, and someone decided to memorize your routine the way you memorize a route home. Streetlights aren't supposed to matter. In daylight, their background a grid of dull poles you never thank. But at 170s a.m., in winter they become your map, your witnesses, the only proof you're still in the world. I was walking home from a late shift collar, up hands buried in my pockets, with my keys threaded between my fingers, when I noticed the first flicker. It wasn't dramatic, not a full blackout, just a quick stutter in the lamp ahead like it blinked at me. The sidewalk was dusted with fresh snow over older ice, so my boots made a crisp crunch that echoed between sleeping houses. The street was empty. No cars. No music. Just wind dragging itself through bare branches. Under the first working streetlight, everything looked normal. My long shadow, the pale sheen of snow, the quiet line of parked cars. Then I stepped into the gap between lights and the world thinned. The next lamp stuttered again twice this time, and for a split second the darkness behind it looked deeper than the rest, like a curtain pulled tight. I kept walking, telling myself it was just a dying bulb. The city was full of them. Then the lamp went out completely as I approached, and at the same moment my phone buzzed with a low battery warning, like the night was coordinated. Everything in me tightened. I slowed under the dead pole and looked up at the glass housing, expecting the faint orange coil of a failing light. Nothing. Just black. Behind me, somewhere in the dark gap I'd just crossed, I heard a soft scuff, not the crunch of snow, but the drag of rubber on concrete. I stopped. The scuff stopped. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to give the darkness my face. I stared forward at the next streetlight down the block, the one that was still on, and started walking again. The instant my footfall resumed, the scuff returned behind me, steady and careful, keeping the same distance like someone measuring with a ruler. I told myself it's a coincidence. A neighbor. Someone going the same way. Then the dead streetlight above me snapped back to life. Not gradually. It ignited like a camera flash, bright white for half a second, and in that harsh burst of light I saw him. A man standing in the yard to my right, half behind a hedge, head tilted as if he'd been watching my approach. His face was pale under the sudden brightness, eyes dark and fixed on me. The light immediately dropped back to normal warm yellow, and the yard went dim again. When I looked, the man was gone. My stomach rolled as if the ground had shifted. I forced myself to keep walking. If I ran, I'd confirm fear. If I confronted, I'd stop. So I walked fast, controlled toward the next pool of light. Behind me, the scuffing footsteps kept pace, never rushing, never closing, just present. At the next streetlight, the bulb flickered once, and I felt it like a warning. The lamp went dark as I stepped under it. My shadow vanished. The sidewalk disappeared into a smear of gray. And then, as if the darkness had teeth, I heard breathing close behind me. One exhale, slow, deliberate, not wind. I spun halfway, not fully, just enough to see movement at the edge of vision. The lamp snapped on again bright, and there he was on the sidewalk, this time 5 steps behind, hood up, hands in his pockets, standing perfectly still, like he'd been placed there by the light itself. The brightness dropped back to normal. He moved at the same moment, sliding behind a parked car so smoothly it looked practiced. That's when I understood the flicker wasn't random. It was a tool. Each glitch was a frame in a terrible little film, showing me a figure only when the light wanted me to see him. My throat went dry. I took my phone out and tried to call someone. The screen lagged in the cold. 5%. 4%. My fingers felt like they belonged to someone else. I hit my sister's name. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't have breath for words. Behind me, the footsteps shifted from scuff to crunch as the person stepped onto the snow-dusted part of the sidewalk. Louder, now less careful. I crossed the street under the next light, and the footsteps crossed behind me. The streetlight above me flickered, and for a split second the whole block went dim like someone had pulled the plug on reality. In that dimness, I saw not one figure, but 2. One near the parked cars, one closer to the yard line, both oriented toward me. Then the lamp stabilized, and one of them was gone, leaving only the empty street and my own breath fogging the air. I stopped in the brightest circle of light I could find, and did something that felt ridiculous but necessary. I started talking loudly, like I was on a call. "Yeah, I'm almost home," I said, voice too bright, too forced. "I'm on Pine and 8th. You're watching me on the camera right." The words tasted like panic. The night stayed quiet. The streetlights buzzed softly. Then the lamp above me flickered again, a longer glitch this time, and the light turned harsh, almost white. In that brightness, I saw the hooded man's face, clearly for the first time, and it wasn't the face that scared me. It was the expression, calm, patient, like he was waiting for the exact moment I'd stop believing my own eyes. The light snapped back to yellow. He was no longer in front of the parked car. He was closer halfway between the car and me, as if he'd used the flicker to move while my vision stuttered. I backed up keys, raised slightly, not as a weapon, but as a boundary. "Don't," I said, and my voice cracked. From somewhere down the block, another streetlight died, plunging the next section into darkness. It felt like a door opening. The hooded man took one step forward. That's when headlights appeared at the far intersection, cutting through the night like a blade. A car turned onto the street, slow its beams, washing the sidewalk. The streetlight above me flickered one last time, then steadied. In the steady light, there was no man, no hood, no face, just empty snow and parked cars, and my own shaking shadow. The car passed without stopping, driver oblivious. I stood there until it was gone, realizing I couldn't trust the streetlights anymore. They weren't protection. They were a switch someone could use to decide when I saw the truth, and when I didn't. I took the long route home, after that staying on the main road with constant traffic, bright storefronts, and security cameras that didn't blink. But even now, whenever a streetlight flickers over my head, my body tenses before my brain catches up, because I remember what it felt like to watch a man appear and disappear in the stutter of light, as if the darkness itself was editing him into my path. A week later, I tried to convince myself it was just an electrical fault, so I checked the city's outage map and even filed a maintenance ticket, anything that would turn fear into paperwork. The response came back, 2 days after no reported issues. No service calls, no faults recorded on that circuit. I told myself the system could be wrong. Then I asked a neighbor on that block if the lights ever flickered. He frowned and said, "Not really. Why?" That night, walking a different route, I passed under a streetlight that stuttered once, and my whole body reacted before my mind did. In the brief pulse of brightness I saw reflected in a storefront window, a hooded silhouette standing behind me, in the gap between pools of light, perfectly still, as if he hadn't followed my path so much as followed my panic. The strap across my shoulder was supposed to be the one thing I could trust. My backpack held my laptop, my badge, the little pieces of my day that made me feel anchored to normal life. I wore it the way everyone does. One strap on, one strap loose, because it's comfortable, and because you don't want to look like you're afraid. It was a bitter winter night. The sidewalks glazed and gritty with salt, and I was walking the last few blocks home from the train station after an evening shift. The neighborhood was residential and quiet, the kind of place where you can hear a dog's nails on hardwood through a closed window. Snow had fallen earlier and been shoveled into uneven ridges, forcing pedestrians into narrow channels of cleared concrete. I kept my head up and my pace steady, telling myself not to overthink the emptiness. Halfway down the first block, I noticed someone behind me, not by sight, but by sound. A soft scuff that didn't match the crisp crunch of my boots. I didn't turn around. I used a dark window as a mirror, pretending to check my phone, and caught the reflection of a man in a dark jacket, walking with his hands low and his head angled slightly down. He wasn't sprinting. He wasn't stumbling. He was moving with purpose, and he was close enough that my reflection and his shared the same pane of glass. I sped up a little. The scuff sped up too. At the next streetlight, I crossed the road, making the move casual, and watched my reflection again. He crossed a few seconds later. My stomach tightened. The street ahead was empty. No cars, no other walkers, only the yellow pools of streetlight and the dark gaps between them. I shifted the backpack higher on my shoulder, instinctively pulling the strap tighter across my chest. In the quiet, that tiny adjustment sounded loud, a scrape of fabric and a click of plastic. Behind me, the man's footsteps changed. They became lighter and faster, less like walking and more like closing distance. I considered running, but the sidewalk was slick, and running is how you fall. Falling is how you lose your bag, your phone, your leverage. So I angled toward a house with a porch light on a rare square of warmth. Before I could reach it, the man accelerated. I heard it clearly, the sudden slap of rubber on wet concrete, and then a hand grabbed the loose strap of my backpack from behind. It wasn't a hard yank at first. It was a testing pull, like someone checking whether you'd fight or freeze. My body reacted faster than my thoughts. I clamped my left hand over the strap against my shoulder and twisted my torso, keeping my feet under me. The strap jerked again, harder. The backpack shifted, dragging my jacket collar. I stumbled half a step, caught myself on the salted edge of a snowbank, and felt the cold shock through my glove. Behind me the man grunted, not angry, just exertion like this was a task. He yanked again, trying to peel the strap off my shoulder like a hook. I didn't scream right away. That's what scares me now, how the first instinct was silence, like my brain was still negotiating whether this counted as real danger. Then the strap slid, and the weight of my bag started to leave my body, and something in me snapped into clarity. I shouted, loud and ugly, "No," and spun hard, swinging my elbow back. My elbow connected with something solid. His forearm, maybe his chest, and the grip faltered for a second. In the streetlight, I saw his face briefly. Young, maybe mid-20s, eyes wide, mouth set tight. Ordinary. Not a monster. Just a person making a choice. He lunged again closer now, and his hand shot for the top handle of the backpack, trying to rip it free in one motion. That movement pulled him into my space, and I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped into him. I drove forward instead of backward, using my shoulder to shove, forcing his balance off the slick pavement. He slipped just a little, and that was enough. His hand lost the handle and grabbed at air. I used the moment to rip the strap fully across my chest, switching the backpack into a front carry like a shield. The man cursed under his breath and reached again, this time aiming for my wrist, not the bag. I backed away fast, keeping my eyes on his hands, and saw something else behind him that made my blood go cold. A second figure at the edge of the darkness, near a parked car, watching. They hadn't moved in yet. They were waiting to see if the first grab worked. I realized then, it wasn't just a snatch and run. It was an attempt to control me, to get me off balance, maybe to drag me toward the street where no one would hear over the wind. I shouted again louder, "Help! Call 911!" and pounded on the nearest door with my fist while keeping the backpack clutched to my chest. The porch light snapped brighter, and a dog exploded into barking inside. The man hesitated. The second figure shifted in the dark, a subtle retreat. Witnesses changed the math. The first man tried one last move, a quick grab at the strap, but I twisted away and kicked my foot back, not aiming to hurt him, just to create distance. My boot scraped his shin. He hissed, then backed up, hands raised as if I was the aggressor. "Relax," he said, like I was overreacting. I thought that was my bag. It was the dumbest lie I'd ever heard, and the casual tone made it worse, like he was testing whether words could rewrite what his hands had done. The door opened a crack chain on, and a man's voice called wary. "What's going on?" "I'm being robbed," I said, breathless. "Please call the police." Behind me, the attacker took 2 steps backward into the darkness. The second figure disappeared, completely swallowed between parked cars. The porch door opened wider, and the homeowner stepped out enough to be seen. The attacker turned away immediately and walked fast down the sidewalk, not running, just leaving like he had someplace else to be. The homeowner called the police, while I stood under the porch light shaking. Backpack pressed to my chest, like it was my heartbeat. When officers arrived, they took my statement and asked if anything was missing. Nothing was missing because I hadn't let go. That was the strange part. I'd kept my bag, but I'd lost something else. The assumption that being grabbed is loud and obvious and cinematic. In reality, it's quick and quiet. A hand appearing out of the dark and yanking at the strap like it owns you. 2 days later, I found a smear of grime on the backpack strap where his fingers had been, and it made me nauseous because it felt like evidence of proximity. Now when I walk home, I wear the backpack tight across my chest from the start. And if someone comes up behind me, I don't wait to see if they mean harm. I move toward light, toward doors, toward any place where hands can't reach me without being seen, because I learned how fast a stranger can try to take your whole life by grabbing one simple strap. A month later, I saw a similar pair of silhouettes near the station entrance, one lingering by the ticket machines, while the other drifted along the platform edge, and my stomach turned because the choreography looked familiar. I changed directions before they could notice me, took a rideshare home, and spent the whole drive watching the rear window like it was a confession booth. The next morning, my shoulder still ached from where the strap had been yanked, and the bruise felt like a reminder that the line between walking and being taken is thinner than you think. I saw him smiling before I saw anything else, because a smile on an empty street at 200A M doesn't look friendly. It looks intentional. It was a winter night, so cold the air felt brittle, and the snow along the curb had been shoved into hard grey walls by plows. I was walking home from a friend's apartment, telling myself I was being responsible because I'd left early and stayed on the main streets. The problem was that main doesn't mean busy when it's late enough. The sidewalks were deserted storefronts, dark, and the streetlights cast long yellow pools that made the spaces between them feel like gaps in reality. I was halfway down a block of closed shops when I noticed someone ahead, standing near the mouth of an alley that ran between two buildings. He wasn't moving. He was just there, posture, relaxed hands at his sides, like he'd stepped out for air. Under the streetlight, his face was visible, and he was smiling, in a way that didn't match anything around him, too wide, too steady, like he'd been holding it for a while. My stomach tightened immediately. People don't stand alone in the cold, smiling at nothing. They smile at someone. I slowed without meaning to. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just kept smiling and watched me approach like he was waiting for me to arrive at a specific spot. I told myself to cross the street to put distance between me and the alley, but there was a ridge of ice along the curb, and the nearest crosswalk was farther down. I didn't want to turn it into a performance. I kept walking, head up, keys in my fist, phone in my pocket. As I got closer, I realized his smile wasn't warm. It was fixed, almost practiced, and his eyes didn't blink much. They tracked me the way someone tracks a ball. When I was about 20 feet away, he finally spoke, voice calm and oddly cheerful. "Hey," he said, like we were old friends running into each other by chance. I didn't answer. I gave him the smallest nod, the kind you use to acknowledge a stranger, without inviting conversation. His smile widened. "You're out late," he said. The words were simple, but the tone made them feel like ownership. I kept walking, aiming to pass him with as much space as the sidewalk allowed. The alley beside him was a black slice between brick walls, snow piled at its edges, like it had been shoved aside by something larger than weather. As I drew level with him, he shifted slightly, not stepping into my path, but angling his body so he could stay close. The smile never left. "Cold night," he said. "You should be careful." The irony made heat flare in my chest. I walked faster. He walked too, matching my new pace with effortless ease. Still a half step behind my shoulder, close enough that I could hear his breathing. I glanced to the side and saw his reflection in a dark shop window, that same smile bright against the night, like a mask he refused to remove. "Where you headed?" he asked, voice still light. I didn't answer. Silence is supposed to be a boundary. With him it was an opening. He chuckled, softly amused by my refusal, and the sound made my skin crawl because it wasn't embarrassed laughter. It was satisfied. I crossed an intersection, hoping the wider space and open sightlines would make him back off. He crossed, right behind me. No hesitation. No change. At the next streetlight, I stopped abruptly, as if checking directions, turning my body slightly so I could see him without fully facing him. He stopped too immediately, still smiling, standing just outside the brightest part of the light, as if he understood exactly how to keep his face visible and his hands less visible. "You okay?" he asked, and it sounded like a joke. I forced, my voice flat. "Please leave me alone." For the first time, the smile wavered, not disappearing, but tightening, like something behind it didn't like being told no. Then it returned even wider, like he was doubling down on the performance. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I'm just walking." He took one step closer. I took one step back. The distance stayed the same. That's when I understood the smile wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to show control. He could keep his face pleasant while pushing me exactly where he wanted. I looked around for witnesses. The street was empty. A traffic light changed colors for no one. Far down the block, a car passed, but it didn't slow. I made a decision fast. I wasn't going to keep moving forward toward my usual route. I turned sharply toward a diner. I knew stayed open late, its neon sign glowing faintly 2 blocks away. I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go home. But going home would mean giving this smiling stranger the last piece of the puzzle. I turned, and behind me his footsteps turned too seamless, as if he'd expected it. He didn't ask why. I turned. He didn't need to. He was already committed to being attached to my movement. The diner grew closer, and the sound of my own boots on gritty snow started to feel like a countdown. The man's breathing remained calm, and that calm was the worst part. Predators don't panic. They pace. They wait. Under the next street light he spoke again. Softer now, almost conspiratorial. "You don't have to be scared," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." My stomach dropped because I hadn't said the word. Scared. And normal people don't reassure you about harm unless harm is on the table. I stopped walking and faced him fully keys, raised in front of me like a small metal fence. "Back up," I said. The smile stayed. He tilted his head slightly like he found me interesting. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious, like he was studying a bug that had learned to talk. He took a step forward. I didn't step back this time. I held my ground under the streetlight, forcing the world to see us even if no one was looking. My voice came out louder. "I'm calling the police." I pulled my phone out, thumb hovering over the emergency shortcut. He watched my hands, and for the first time, his eyes moved away from my face down to the screen, calculating. The smile finally thinned. "You're overreacting," he said, mild annoyance creeping in, as if I'd broken the rules of a game by seeking help. I didn't call yet. I did something else. I started speaking loudly as if someone was already on the line. "Yeah," I said, voice bright and false. "I'm on 3rd and Milton, right by the diner." "He's right here." The man's head snapped up. The smile returned immediately, but now it looked strained, like a rubber band pulled too tight. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. I didn't answer. I kept walking toward the diner faster now. He followed for 3 steps, then slowed. He stopped under the streetlight and watched me go, smile fixed again, as if he could still win by making the ending ambiguous. I reached the diner and pushed inside bell, jingling warmth hitting my face. 2 people at the counter turned to look. I went straight to the cashier and said low but urgent, "There's a man outside." He followed me. "Can you please call someone?" The cashier's expression changed instantly, and he glanced toward the window. Outside, under the streetlight, the man stood perfectly still, smiling at the glass, like he could see through it and into my thoughts. When the cashier lifted a phone, the man's smile finally broke not into fear, but into a brief flash of irritation. Then he turned calmly and walked away into the darkness, between streetlights, unhurried, as if he knew that leaving before anyone arrived was part of the plan. I stayed inside until my hands stopped shaking. Later, when I finally got a ride home, I kept thinking about that smile, how it made my instinct scream even before he spoke, how it turned an ordinary face into a threat, how it felt like a signal that said, "I can look harmless while I decide what to do with you." For weeks afterward, I caught myself scanning empty streets for expressions, not bodies, because I learned that sometimes the most frightening thing in the dark isn't a weapon or a shadow. Sometimes it's a person who refuses to stop smiling, no matter how clearly you're trying to get away. At first, I thought it was a star, because it hovered so steadily above the street that my brain reached for the safest explanation. It was winter late, and the sky was clear enough that the cold felt sharper, like the air had nothing to hide behind. I was walking home from a friend's place with my hood up, boots crunching over thin ice, and the neighborhood was quiet in the way suburbs get quiet, when everyone is asleep, and the only movement is the occasional car passing like a slow thought. The light appeared above the houses, 2 blocks behind me, a small white point that moved smoothly, not like a plane, not like a bird. It drifted, stopped, then drifted again, keeping roughly the same height. I glanced at it, then dismissed it. People fly drones. Kids do it all the time. The moment I dismissed it was the moment it moved closer. The light slid forward along the street line, and I realized it wasn't in the sky at all. It was lower, maybe just above rooftop level, following the corridor of the road. My stomach tightened. I told myself it could still be nothing. Someone filming snow. Someone testing a Christmas gift. I kept walking, but I couldn't stop checking over my shoulder. The light held its distance at first, then adjusted when I sped up, moving forward as if pulled by the same string. It wasn't wandering. It was tracking. The sound reached me next, faint at first, like a mosquito trapped in a jar. A high, steady whir that blended with wind until you focused on it, and then you couldn't unhear it. The whir grew louder, and the light shifted position from behind me to above the sidewalk a little to my left, as if the thing wanted a better angle. I stopped under a streetlight and looked up. The drone was real. 4 rotors, small body camera gimbal underneath, red and green indicator lights blinking like tiny eyes. It hovered above me with unnatural steadiness, the cold air not affecting it at all. My breath fogged up into its space and the drone rose, slightly adjusting like it didn't want my condensation on its lens. That tiny movement made my skin crawl. It was reacting to me. I raised my hand and waved it half as a test, half as a desperate go-away signal. The drone backed up a foot, then returned to its original position, as if the operator had corrected it. My throat went dry. I pulled my phone out and tried to take a picture, but the drone shifted immediately, sliding to the side, so the streetlight glare washed over my screen, turning the image into a bright smear. I moved under the light to get a clearer angle. The drone moved too, staying just far enough that the camera could still see me without getting too close. That's when a new thought hit me, colder than the air. This wasn't random. Someone was watching me in real time. Not from a window, not from behind a tree, from somewhere hidden, using a machine to follow without risking their own body. The idea made my chest tighten with anger and panic. I started walking again faster, toward a busier road, where passing headlights might make the drone less useful. The drone followed, whir rising and falling as it adjusted speed, staying above and behind like a leash you can't see but can feel. I turned down a side street, abruptly hoping to break line of sight. The drone turned with me, smooth and immediate, and in that instant the fear shifted into certainty. It was keyed to my movement. I was the target. My phone's battery was low, and the cold made the screen lag. I fumbled to start recording video anyway. The drone rose higher, just enough that the angle made it harder for my camera to capture it clearly. It wasn't just following. It was avoiding being documented. I ducked under a tree to use branches as cover. The drone hovered above the tree line, light flickering through bare limbs like an insect trapped in winter. The whir intensified, then softened as it repositioned. I could feel it, searching for a gap to see through. That's when I heard something else. A car door closing somewhere nearby, the heavy thunk of metal. My head snapped toward the sound. A vehicle was parked halfway down the block, lights off, engine silent. I hadn't noticed it when I turned onto this street. Under the dim spill of a streetlight, I saw a person's silhouette near the driver's side, standing still, head tilted up toward the drone. The operator. My stomach dropped. The drone wasn't the predator. It was the extension. I forced myself to keep moving, eyes flicking between the hovering machine and the shadow near the car. The drone drifted forward, as if guiding me, and the person near the car took a few steps along the curb, staying in the dark, not rushing as if they didn't need to. They had the drone to keep track of me. I turned back toward the main road, choosing the most lit path, but the drone stayed overhead, and the silhouette near the car started moving too slow at first, then faster, like they decided my detour didn't matter. I felt trapped in a new kind of pursuit. One part mechanical, one part human. The drone's light hovered directly above me now, casting a small, moving circle on the snow. It felt like being marked. I could hear the camera gimbal clicking faintly as it adjusted tiny mechanical sounds that made my skin crawl because they meant the machine was working to keep me centered. I ran. The moment I ran, the drone surged forward, its whir rising into a sharp pitch, and behind me, I heard footsteps on snow. Real footsteps, closing from somewhere I couldn't see clearly. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward a row of houses with porch lights, toward any place where people might be awake. The drone stayed with me, light bobbing, following with a smoothness that felt inhuman. I reached a house with a bright motion light over the garage, and hammered on the door hard enough to hurt. The motion light snapped on, flooding the driveway. The drone reacted instantly, rising higher and backing away, as if the sudden brightness disrupted its camera. The footsteps behind me slowed. A voice from the dark called out, irritated, "Hey, stop. You're making a big deal out of nothing." The words were meant to sound normal, but the presence of the drone made them insane. Normal people don't deny while flying a camera over your head. I pounded again. Inside, a dog barked. A light turned on upstairs. The drone hovered at the edge of the driveway light, still fixed on me, stubborn as if the operator couldn't stand to lose sight. The door opened a crack chain on, and an older man's face appeared startled. "What's going on?" he demanded. I didn't have time for a perfect explanation. "A drone is following me," I said, breathless. "Someone is out there. Please call the police." The man's eyes flicked upward, and for the first time I saw real recognition in someone else's face validation that I wasn't imagining this. He swore under his breath and swung the door open, pulling me inside. Warm air hit me like a wave. He locked the door, then moved to a window and peeked through the curtain. Outside, the drone hesitated, hovering like it couldn't decide whether to retreat or keep filming. The older man shouted through the glass voice, loud and angry. "Get the hell out of here!" The drone backed up abruptly, then shot upward, climbing fast into the dark sky. The whir faded. A moment later, a car engine started down the block, and headlights swept across the street, as a vehicle pulled away without turning on its interior light, leaving like a person who never wanted to be seen. The police arrived, took my statement, asked if I recognized the car. I didn't. They asked if I had video of the drone. I had shaky footage, mostly streetlight glare, and a bobbing white dot, but it was enough to show something had been above me. The officer nodded grim and said people use drones for theft, scouting for harassment, for all kinds of things that aren't technically attack until they become one. That word technically made my stomach twist, because it meant there was a window where someone could hunt you with a machine and still claim it was harmless. After that night, I stopped thinking of drones as toys. Whenever I hear a faint whir overhead, even in daylight, my body reacts the same way. Shoulders tight, head turning, eyes searching the sky. Because the worst part wasn't the drone itself. The worst part was realizing a person could follow you without footsteps, without breath, without risk, and still keep you pinned under a moving light, like you were something being tracked on a screen. I noticed the van because it didn't exist the way a car should exist at night. No headlights, no taillights, just a moving block of darker darkness, sliding along the street behind me, like it was trying to be mistaken for the night itself. It was winter late, and the neighborhood was quiet in that brittle way, where every small sound feels like it echoes off sleeping houses. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks like low walls, dirty at the edges from salt and exhaust, and the air smelled faintly metallic, the way it does when it's cold enough to sting your lungs. I was walking home from a closing shift, tired but alert, keys threaded between my fingers, phone in my pocket with just enough battery to make me feel falsely secure. The streetlight ahead buzzed softly, throwing a warm circle onto the snow. Behind me, the road was a long stretch of shadow. I heard tires first, soft, slow, almost careful, rolling over slush. Then I caught movement in the reflection of a dark window, a large shape creeping forward with no lights on, close enough that I should have seen it clearly, but the lack of illumination made it look like a gap in reality. My stomach tightened. No lights at midnight in winter isn't normal. It's not forgetful. It's deliberate. I kept walking, pretending not to notice, because acknowledging it felt like giving it permission to get closer. The tires slowed. The van matched my pace. I drifted farther from the curb, closer to the snowbank, forcing space. The van drifted too, staying parallel. The street was empty, no other cars, no passing headlights to expose it, no witnesses to make it behave like a normal vehicle. I told myself it could be someone trying not to wake the neighborhood, but that excuse fell apart the moment the van rolled up beside me. Still dark engine idling low, and I heard the faint click of a sliding door latch. My body went cold. All at once. The van didn't stop fully. It crept forward a few feet, then slowed again, as if the driver was testing the exact point where I would panic. I pulled my phone out and pretended to be on a call, speaking loudly into a dark screen. "Yeah, I'm almost there," I said. Voice too bright, too forced. "I'm on," I named the cross street out loud. I wanted whoever was inside the van to hear that I was making myself traceable. The van stayed beside me anyway, and then with a soft mechanical shush, the side door began to slide open. Not all the way. Just a crack, like a mouth parting. Warm darkness spilled out deeper than the night, and I smelled something stale. Cigarettes and damp fabric, like an enclosed space that had been waiting. I didn't look into the opening. I didn't want to give my eyes something they couldn't unsee. I kept walking faster. The van accelerated smoothly to keep pace. The door slid a little wider. The sound was quiet, but unmistakable, and in the empty street it felt obscene, like something private happening in public. A voice came from inside, low and casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "Hey." I didn't answer. My heart hammered, so hard it made my hands shake. The van rolled forward a few feet, then angled slightly toward the curb, tightening the space between me and the vehicle. The snowbank pressed against my left side. The van pressed against my right. Suddenly the sidewalk felt like a corridor designed to funnel me. I stepped off the sidewalk onto the street for a second, risking ice and traffic just to create distance. The van corrected, immediately, drifting outward to shadow me in the roadway, still dark, still trying not to be seen. That's when I realized the driver wasn't afraid of being noticed, because there was no one to notice. The whole block was asleep. The streetlights were spaced too far apart. The houses had their curtains drawn. The night was a shield. I spotted a porch light ahead, one bright square of warmth, and aimed for it like it was a destination. The van's door slid farther open. I heard movement inside, a shift of weight, the faint scrape of a shoe against metal. A second voice closer to the opening said, "Come here." Not shouted, not pleaded, commanded like the words were supposed to be enough. My throat went dry. I ran. The moment my steps turned frantic, the van surged forward, engine louder now, and for the first time I heard how close it really was. The door slammed shut with a hard metallic bang, and the van accelerated to pull ahead of me. That move was worse than following because it meant positioning. The van turned at the next corner, lights still off, and disappeared. For a brief second I felt relief, until I realized it hadn't left. It was setting up. I slowed breath, burning, scanning the darkness ahead for the reappearance of that moving void. The streetlight above me flickered once, and I felt my own fear spike, like it was keyed to electricity. I kept running toward the porch light, and then the van reappeared, directly ahead, angled across the road, still dark, blocking the path like a wall. No headlights, no brake lights, just the shape of it, huge and silent. My body screamed at me to stop, but stopping meant giving it time. I swerved, cutting toward the houses, trying to get around it by hopping onto a driveway. The van's engine revved. It rolled forward a few feet, adjusting its angle to keep me from passing easily. And then the side door slid open again, wider this time, and a figure's silhouette appeared at the opening, just a human shape against deeper darkness. I didn't wait to see hands. I bolted for the porch, with the light sprinting across a yard that crunched under frozen snow. I hit the steps and hammered on the door, with both fists, shouting, "Help! Please! Open the door!" Behind me the van idled a low purr, and the door remained open like a threat held in suspension. A dog barked inside. Light snapped on behind curtains. The door opened a crack chained, and a startled face appeared. I didn't have a clean explanation. I blurted, "There's a van. Someone tried. Please, let me in." The homeowner's eyes flicked past me to the street. Even in the porch light, the van was hard to read, a dark mass with an open side, like a wound. The homeowner's expression changed from confusion to alarm. The chain came off fast. The door opened and a hand grabbed my sleeve and yanked me inside. Warm air hit my face so hard it almost made me dizzy. The homeowner locked the door, deadbolt and chain, then moved to the window and peeked through the curtain without exposing his face. I stood in the entryway, shaking, listening. Outside, the van sat for a few seconds longer, engine steady, as if whoever was inside was deciding whether a lit house and a witness were worth it. Then the side door slid shut again, slow and controlled, and the van rolled away, without turning on its lights, disappearing into the dark like it had never been there. The homeowner called the police, while I tried to slow my breathing. When the officers arrived, they asked the obvious questions: what color was the van, what make, what plate? I had almost nothing. No lights means no details. It's a tactic designed to steal information from you while they keep all of theirs. The officers drove the surrounding blocks, but a dark van in a dark neighborhood at midnight is a perfect ghost. After they left, the homeowner offered to drive me home, and I accepted, because walking those last few blocks felt impossible. In his car, headlights on, everything looked normal again. Snowbanks, quiet houses, empty streets. That normality made me sick, because it meant the van could have been anywhere, and I would have seen nothing until it was beside me again. The next day in daylight, I walked that street and noticed something I'd missed at night. The sidewalk is narrow. They're pinched between snowbanks and a line of parked cars. A van with no lights could creep alongside you, and you'd have nowhere to go without stepping into the road. It wasn't a random place to hunt. It was geometry. It was design. Ever since then, when I see a vehicle at night with its lights off, my body reacts before my mind can argue. I don't think maybe they forgot. I think someone is trying not to exist. And I learned that the most terrifying thing about a van with no lights isn't the fear of what's inside, it's the realization that someone can move right next to you in the dark and leave you with no clear description except the shape of your own panic. They were standing there like they belonged, like two men blocking a sidewalk at midnight was as normal as a couple chatting outside a bar. It was winter, and the air had that hard, dry cold that makes your skin feel too tight. Snow had been shoveled into high ridges along the curb, turning the sidewalk into a narrow corridor of cleared concrete bordered by white walls. I was walking home from a late train, tired and focused on the simple math of getting inside fast, when I saw them under the next streetlight. Two men, broad-shouldered silhouettes, positioned side by side so perfectly that there was no clean way to pass without brushing against one of them. The street around us was empty. No cars. No other pedestrians. The streetlight above them buzzed faintly, casting their shadows long across the snow like they were reaching for me. I slowed, automatically instincts, pulling on the brakes before my brain could come up with a polite explanation. The men didn't move aside. They didn't even pretend to. One of them turned his head slightly and looked straight at me. Not a quick glance. A steady measuring stare. The other man kept his gaze down at first, like he was checking something in his hands, but I could tell he was listening, waiting for my reaction. My stomach tightened. If they were just neighbors talking, they would have shifted to make room the moment they saw someone approach. If they were decent strangers, they'd step into the snowbank or the street for 2 seconds, out of basic courtesy. They stayed planted. It felt staged. I kept walking slower, considering my options. The snowbanks on either side were too high to climb quickly. The street was open, but stepping into it meant ice, and the possibility of a car you can't hear in time. Still, open street is better than a tight choke point. I angled toward the curb, preparing to step off the sidewalk and go around them at a wide distance. The man on the left spoke, voice easy, almost friendly. "Hey," he said. "You got a minute?" I didn't answer. I kept moving eyes, scanning their hands, their stance, the space behind them. The man on the right lifted his head and smiled a small, quick expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for an address," he said. You know where he named a street that was close to mine, close enough to sound plausible, but he pronounced it slightly wrong, like someone reading it off a screen. My pulse spiked. People who actually live here don't mispronounce the street they're standing on. I forced my voice flat. "No." I stepped off the sidewalk into the street, careful on the slick edge, intending to pass around them with a wide arc. The man on the left shifted instantly, stepping off the curb too, not toward me aggressively, but enough to mirror my move and keep me within range. The man on the right stayed on the sidewalk, maintaining the block. Suddenly, they weren't just two guys standing there. They were 2 points creating a funnel. The man on the left held his hands up slightly, palms open, performing harmlessness. "Relax," he said, chuckling, as if I was being dramatic. "We're not trying to scare you." He took one more step, reducing the space between us. "Just tell us the address and you can go." The way he said "you can go" made my skin crawl because it implied I needed permission. I backed away, keeping my feet under me on the icy road. "I don't know," I repeated. "Move." The man on the sidewalk, the right one, shifted his weight and looked past me down the street as if checking whether anyone was coming. That tiny glance told me everything they were monitoring witnesses. My throat went dry. I pulled my phone out, not to scroll, not to pretend, but to make the device visible like a deterrent. The screen glowed, and I hit the emergency shortcut without fully committing, thumb hovering, using the light as a boundary. The man in the street noticed it and smiled, wider irritation flickering behind the expression like a crack. "You calling someone?" he asked, tone still light, but now sharpened. "Go ahead," the other man said from the sidewalk, voice low. "Cool." He didn't sound afraid of police. He sounded amused. That was the worst part. Confident. Predators are calm when they think the environment belongs to them. I spoke loudly, not even on a call, yet just making sound to fill the emptiness. "I'm on Milton near 3rd, I said, voice firm. "2 men are blocking the sidewalk." I wanted the words in the air documented by my own voice, if nothing else. The man on the left took another step, and I saw his shoes slide slightly on the ice, a small loss of balance. That tiny imperfection gave me a jolt of courage. He wasn't supernatural. He was just a person, gambling on my hesitation. I raised my keys in my fist, the metal glinting under the streetlight, and said, "Back up." The man laughed softly. "You gonna stab me with keys?" he asked, as if it was funny, as if my fear was entertainment. The man on the sidewalk finally moved, but not aside. He stepped forward, tightening the block, forcing me farther into the street. Now I was boxed between them and the open road, and the snowbanks behind them made retreat feel like a trap too. My mind raced. I needed light and people. There was a convenience store 2 blocks away with a bright sign and cameras. 2 blocks suddenly felt like 10 miles, but it was the only target I had. I turned abruptly and started walking fast, back the way I'd come, choosing retreat over squeezing past them. The moment I turned, both men moved. Not sprinting, not yet, but following with controlled steps, staying close enough that I could hear their shoes scuffing on salted concrete. The man on the left said, "Hey, don't be like that." The man on the right laughed, once short and sharp. "Where you going?" he called like it was a joke. I didn't answer. I walked faster, almost a jog, careful not to slip. Their footsteps stayed behind me, matching my acceleration. The street remained empty, and that emptiness made my mouth taste like metal. I kept speaking loudly into my phone, pretending the line was open, even before I hit call. "Yeah, I'm heading to the store," I said. "If they keep following me, call 911. I hit the call button for real, then my friend's number, anyone who might answer, and held the phone to my ear. It rang. No answer. The cold made my screen lag. I tried again, this time 911 thumb shaking. The screen flashed, as if connecting. Behind me, the men's footsteps slowed slightly, the first sign that the possibility of consequences changed their math. "You're really doing that," the left one muttered, annoyed now, dropping the friendly performance. I didn't look back. I kept moving toward the brighter street, toward the intersection where traffic sometimes passed, even late. Headlights appeared at the far end of the block, one car slow, cautious on icy roads. Relief surged through me so hard, it almost made me dizzy. I stepped closer to the curb and raised my arm like I was hailing a cab, making myself visible. The car slowed, more driver uncertain. The men behind me hesitated. They didn't stop completely, but their pace changed, like their confidence had cracked. I shouted loud and raw, "Call the police!" The driver's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. The car rolled forward, and the presence of another human shifted the street's balance. Behind me, the men stopped. I risked a glance back. Under the streetlight, they stood side by side again, but now their bodies looked less casual, more tense, like they were deciding whether to push their luck. The man on the right lifted a hand and gave a small shrug, a theatrical gesture that said, "What did we do?" The man on the left smiled thinly, but it wasn't playful anymore. It was resentful, like I'd spoiled something. Then they turned, not running, just walking away, into the darkness between streetlights, with the unhurried pace of people who know they can vanish without consequence. The driver pulled up beside me and cracked his window. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice tight. I nodded too fast. "Can you stay here with me for a second?" I said. They were blocking the sidewalk. The driver looked back toward where they'd been, then nodded and reached for his phone. "I'll call," he said. By the time anyone arrived, the men were gone. Of course they were. That's the point of doing it. On a quiet block with snowbanks and no witnesses. The threat is real, but the evidence is thin. The officer asked for descriptions. Height, clothes, faces. I gave what I could. Dark jackets, knit caps, one with a narrow smile, one with a calm voice. It sounded flimsy, even to me. But the officer's expression didn't suggest disbelief. It suggested recognition, like he'd heard the same pattern before. Afterward, I didn't feel grateful that nothing happened. I felt shaken because something had happened, it just hadn't reached the part people would call a crime. 2 men had arranged themselves like a gate and waited to see if I'd try to pass. They'd tested how easily a public sidewalk could be turned into a private hallway. Now when I walk at night and see 2 people ahead, I don't think they'll make room. I think in angles and exits. I watch hands. I choose light. And if the sidewalk narrows between snowbanks, I step into the street early, before anyone can decide to stand there and make me ask permission to keep walking. The worst part wasn't the walk, it was the last 10 seconds, when you're close enough to smell your own warm hallway and still far enough to be caught outside. It was winter cold, the kind that makes your joints feel stiff and turns your breath into thick clouds that hang in the air like evidence. I'd done everything right that night. Stayed on lit streets, kept my head up, phone in hand, keys threaded between my fingers. I was exhausted and counting blocks the way you count down to sleep. By the time my building came into view, I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made me careless. The entrance was set back from the sidewalk, behind a short path lined with shrubs and a low metal fence. A keypad lock on a glass door. A small security camera above it that usually made me feel safer. That night, it felt like a stage light bright enough to show me clearly, not bright enough to show who might be watching. I'd noticed him a block ago, not by sight, but by sound. The soft crunch of someone else's steps, syncing with mine, then drifting, then returning. At first I told myself it was another resident walking home. But when I crossed the street, and the steps crossed too, the story turned. When I stopped under a streetlight and pretended to check my phone, the steps stopped behind me like a held breath. When I started walking again, the steps resumed instantly, a half beat behind, like I was pulling him along on a string. I didn't look back. I didn't want to give him my face. I just kept moving toward my building because the closer I got, the more I needed the night to be over. The path to the entrance was narrow, the shrubs piled with snow, the fence rimed with ice. I stepped off the sidewalk and onto the little private walkway, and the sound of my boots changed from street crunch to softer packed snow. Behind me the other footsteps followed onto the path. Same change in sound. Same confirmation. My stomach tightened. The glass door was ahead, reflecting the streetlight behind me in a bright smear, and in that reflection I saw a darker shape moving at the end of the walkway. A man hood up, hands low, walking like he wasn't in a hurry because he didn't need to be. I reached the door, and my hands suddenly felt useless. I dug my keys out. Fingers numb metal, cold enough to bite. The key ring tangled on the fabric of my glove. I tried to pinch the fob between my fingers and missed. It slipped, clacking against the metal frame, loud in the quiet. Behind me, footsteps crunched closer, measured steady. I told myself, just punch the code, just open the door. But my brain did that awful thing it does under stress, where it makes simple tasks complicated. I stared at the keypad, and my mind went blank, even though I typed that code every day. My finger hovered over the numbers, like a stranger's. Crunch, crunch, closer. I forced myself to breathe. I tapped the first digit, then another. The keypad beeped too loudly. My glove caught on the edge of the buttons. I fumbled and hit the wrong number. The keypad flashed red. Error. The sound behind me stopped for a second, as if he'd paused to watch me fail. Then the steps resumed closer than before. I could feel the heat of a presence behind my shoulder, not touching me, but crowding me, narrowing my air. I tried the code again with shaking fingers. Beep, beep, beep. My key ring slipped out of my hand and dropped onto the concrete with a sharp clatter that echoed off the glass. The sound made me flinch hard, Behind me, the man made a small, amused sound, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "You okay?" he said, voice low too close, like he'd stepped into my personal space on purpose. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. In that narrow walkway, he didn't need volume. He needed proximity. I didn't answer. I crouched instinctively to grab my keys, and the moment I lowered myself, I hated it because crouching is vulnerable. It's the posture you take when you're about to be pushed. I snatched the keys up and stood so fast, I nearly lost my balance. The man was closer, now close enough that I could see the outline of his mouth under the hood, close enough to smell stale smoke and cold air trapped in fabric. I backed up until my shoulder hit the glass door. He didn't touch me, but he didn't step away either. He just stood there in the narrow path between shrubs and fence, making it clear I had nowhere to move without passing him. "It's late," he said, tone still calm. "You shouldn't be out here alone." The irony tasted like metal. I raised my keys slightly, not as a threat, but as a boundary, and forced my voice to work. "Back up," I said. My voice shook, which made me angry at my body for betraying me. He tilted his head like he was curious. "Why?" he asked, and there was something almost playful in it, like he enjoyed hearing me name the rule. I tried the keypad again, with my free hand forcing my finger to move despite the tremor. Beep, 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 green. The lock clicked. Relief hit me so hard my knees felt weak. I yanked the door open and slipped inside, turning my body sideways to squeeze through without giving him a clear opening. He moved at the same time, not rushing, just stepping forward as if he belonged there too, as if the unlocked door was for both of us. Instinct took over. I slammed the door toward the frame, hard. The glass shuddered. The man's hand shot out and hit the door edge. For a split second, the door didn't close. His fingers curled around the metal like a hook. His face was closer now, and I could see his eyes clearly in the lobby light. Steady, unflinching, annoyed that I'd made this messy. "Hey," he said, voice tightening. "Relax." I shoved the door with both hands, putting my weight into it. The man's grip held for one more heartbeat, then slipped. The door slammed shut, and the lock clicked again. I stumbled backward inside the lobby chest, heaving. Through the glass, he stood on the walkway, hand lowered, staring at me. The security camera above the door blinked its tiny light, recording everything from its unhelpful angle. He looked up at the camera briefly, then back at me, and smiled. Not wide, not theatrical, just a small expression that said he wasn't surprised. He leaned toward the glass and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Then he lifted his hand and tapped the glass once with a knuckle. Gentle, almost affectionate, like he was knocking on an aquarium. I backed away toward the elevator, fingers fumbling for the button, heart pounding so hard it made my vision shimmer. The elevator took too long. I kept my eyes on the door because I expected him to find another way in to tailgate another resident to appear behind me in the mirror of the lobby. But he didn't. He just stood there outside for a few seconds longer, watching me with that calm patience, then turned and walked away down the sidewalk, as if he'd simply changed his mind. When I finally got upstairs and locked my apartment door, I leaned against it, shaking, listening for footsteps in the hallway. Nothing. For an hour, I sat on my couch, with all the lights on, replaying every second, the keys slipping, the red error flash his voice behind me, his hand on the door. In the morning, after daylight returned and everything felt less sharp, I went downstairs to check the entryway because I needed proof it had happened. The glass door looked normal. The keypad worked. The security camera stared blankly. Then, I noticed something on the concrete outside, right where my keys had fallen. A small dark scuff mark, like a shoe had pivoted there, and beside it, a faint smear on the glass at shoulder height, like someone had leaned close. I told myself it could be anyone, but my body knew. The night hadn't ended when I reached my building. It ended when I got the door locked behind me, and even then it didn't feel like safety. It felt like I'd won a round by a margin of seconds. The night I learned what the walk home really means started as the most ordinary thing in the world. A short route I'd taken so many times I could have done it with my eyes closed. It was winter. the air dry and biting snow packed into gritty sheets along the sidewalks, and the wind had that constant low howl that makes every neighborhood feel emptier than it is. I left my friend's apartment just after midnight because I didn't want to miss the last bus, and I told myself I was being smart by not staying out later. The bus dropped me off 3 blocks from my building under a streetlight that flickered like a tired eyelid. The driver pulled away, red taillights shrinking until they vanished, and the quiet settled around me like a heavy blanket. I checked my phone out of habit 9% battery. I felt a brief sting of annoyance at myself, then shoved it away. 3 blocks. 10 minutes. I started walking. Boots crunching softly. Scarf pulled high, keys already threaded between my fingers because it made me feel prepared. The first block was calm. Houses dark. Snowbanks high. My breath came out in slow white bursts. Halfway down the second block I noticed the car. Not by sound, by absence. The street behind me had been empty. Then, suddenly, there was a vehicle rolling at a slow crawl. Headlights dimmed as if the driver didn't want to announce himself. It didn't pass. It didn't turn. It simply kept a careful distance close enough that its presence felt intentional, far enough that I couldn't accuse it of anything except existing. I told myself it was a neighbor heading home. Then it slowed when I slowed. It crept when I crept. The tires made a soft shushing noise over salted slush, and that steady sound started to feel like pressure. I crossed the street at the next corner, pretending it was nothing, and watched the car in the reflection of a dark window. It crossed too, not immediately but within seconds, the most damning kind of hesitation, the pause of decision. My stomach tightened. I picked up my pace and aimed for a more lit route that ran past a small strip of businesses, a laundromat, a closed cafe, a gas station farther down, light and cameras. Witnesses even if no one was awake. Behind me, the car drifted closer. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning again, and the screen dimmed as if the cold was squeezing it. I tried to call my friend anyway. The call failed once, then rang, without answer. The car rolled up behind me, headlights painting my shadow long and sharp on the snow. I didn't look back. I kept walking, forcing my breathing to stay even because panic makes your steps sloppy. At the next intersection, the car turned ahead of me, slow, casual, and pulled into a side street that cut toward my building. That move was worse than following, because it meant positioning. It meant the driver knew the geometry of this neighborhood the way I did. I stopped under a streetlight and listened. The wind hissed through bare branches. No footsteps, no voices. Then from the side street ahead, I heard a car door close. One heavy thunk that sounded too loud in the cold. My whole body tightened. I backed up one step, then another, keeping the streetlight above me like a protective circle. A figure stepped out from the side street into the edge of the light. A man, hood up hands, low posture, calm. He didn't rush. He didn't call out. He simply started walking toward the intersection at the same slow, confident pace of someone who expects you to make space for him. My mind raced. Car plus man means coordination. The car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a delivery system. I turned around and started walking back the way I'd come faster now toward the main road. Behind me, I heard the man's footsteps begin. Crunch, crunch, steady closing. The car's engine started again somewhere in the side street, low and smooth. I was being bracketed. I forced myself not to run yet. Running makes you loud. Running makes you slip. Running tells them you're afraid and fear is currency. I reached the laundromat's bright sign and cut into its parking lot, intending to go inside, but the laundromat looked closed, lights off, gate down. The only open place nearby was the gas station, farther down the main road, and suddenly that distance felt huge. The man's footsteps were closer now, and I could hear the slight drag of his sole on gritty snow, a sound that told me he wasn't in a hurry, because he didn't need to be. From the road, the car appeared again, rolling slow, with headlights still dim, matching my direction like a shadow on wheels. I felt trapped between them, man behind, car alongside, and the empty street ahead. I did the one thing that felt humiliating but necessary. I stepped into the roadway and flagged down the first passing car I saw, waving both arms. The driver slowed, confused, and I shouted, "Please help." The car didn't stop fully. It rolled past the driver's face, turned away the cowardice of normal people who don't want trouble. The moment it passed, the street felt even emptier, like my attempt had proven how alone I really was. The car with dim headlights drifted closer to the curb. The passenger window lowered a few inches. Warm air spilled out. A voicemail calm said, "You lost." I didn't answer. I kept walking, angling toward the gas station's glow. The man behind me spoke for the first time, and his voice was closer than it should have been. "You don't have to do all that," he said, like I'd inconvenienced him. I spun slightly, just enough to keep him in my peripheral, without fully turning my back to the car. Under the streetlight, I saw his face for a second, ordinary, almost blank eyes, steady mouth, neutral. The car's driver laughed softly from behind glass, like my fear was a show. Something in me snapped into clarity then. This wasn't about conversation. This was about moving me into a space where the math favored them. The gas station was still too far. My building was closer, but going there would reveal the last and worst piece of information. I needed a third option. Across the street was a small apartment complex with a lit lobby and a keypad entry. I didn't live there, but the light was real, and real light changes behavior. I cut toward it without hesitation. The car hesitated, then corrected, turning wide to follow. The man behind me sped up a half step, and I heard his breathing, now controlled and steady. I reached the other building's lobby door and jabbed the call box randomly, fingers shaking. No answer. I tried another unit. No answer. My phone hit 3%. The screen lagged. Behind me, the man's footsteps stopped, and that sudden silence was a warning. I turned my head and saw him standing a few feet away, just outside the lobby. Light hands, still low posture, patient. The car idled at the curb with its dim headlights waiting. The man smiled, slightly not friendly, not wide, just enough to show he was comfortable. "Come on," he said, voice soft, and he gestured with 2 fingers like he was calling a dog. My stomach turned. I raised my keys, the metal glinting, and forced my voice loud. "Back up. I'm calling the police." The man's smile didn't move. "Call," he said, almost amused. I tried anyway. "I hit 911. The phone screen froze, then went black. Dead. The cold and the battery had won. I stared at the dark rectangle in my hand like it had betrayed me. The man took 1 step forward. The car door across the street opened slightly, as if someone inside was preparing to get out. That was the moment I ran. I ran, not toward my building, not toward the gas station, but toward the brightest thing on the block, the main road, where traffic would eventually pass, where cameras were, more likely where the world couldn't pretend I didn't exist. My boots slipped once on ice, and I caught myself panic, flaring white hot, but I kept running short, careful steps, breath tearing. Behind me I heard the man run too now, his footsteps louder and faster, and I heard the car's engine surge as it pulled out to follow. The sound of pursuit became a layered noise, feet on snow, tires on slush, the wind ripping past my ears. I reached the main road and almost stumbled into the street. Headlights appeared, one car then another, and I stepped into the edge of the lane, waving both arms like a maniac. A car honked brakes, squealing slightly on icy pavement, and the driver rolled down the window a crack, shouting. I didn't apologize. I yelled, "Call 911. Someone is chasing me." The driver's expression changed instantly, from anger to alarm. He locked eyes with the sidewalk behind me, and I followed his gaze. The man had stopped at the corner just outside the flood of main road headlights, as if the light itself was a boundary he didn't want to cross. The car with dim headlights slowed behind him and idled waiting. For a second, all 3 of us existed in the same frame. Me, in the open, under bright traffic lights. Him in the shadowed edge. The car, like a patient animal behind him. The driver in front of me grabbed his phone, and that tiny act shifted the balance. The man in the dark made a small, irritated motion with his hand. Not a wave, or more like dismissal. And then he turned and walked back down the side street with the calm pace of someone who knows panic drains you faster than running does. The dim headlight car followed, turning smoothly, disappearing into the neighborhood without ever fully lighting up, like a ghost returning to its hiding place. I stood there, shaking under the main road streetlights while the driver spoke to dispatch. When the police arrived, I gave them everything I had. The side street, the timing, the shape of the car, the way the headlights were dimmed, the man's hood, his voice. It felt flimsy. The officer nodded anyway, eyes serious, and said something that landed like a stone in my chest. They look for routines. He offered to drive me home. I accepted, and on the way we passed my own building, my safe place looking harmless under its entry light. The officer parked and walked me to my door, waiting while I unlocked it, waiting while I locked it again. Inside, I stood in my warm hallway listening to the building settle, feeling the delayed shaking in my hands. For an hour I told myself it was over, because I was inside. Then I heard the faintest sound, a soft tap at the lobby glass downstairs, not loud enough to echo, just enough to be imagined. I went to my window and looked down at the street. Under a streetlight across from the entrance, a car sat with its lights off, engine running just enough to fog the windows, a dark shape blending into winter night. It stayed there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, then rolled away without headlights disappearing, as if it had never been real. That was the final lesson of the walk home. Sometimes you don't escape by reaching your door. Sometimes all you do is survive the night, long enough to make someone decide they can try again later when the street is quieter, the snowbanks higher, and your phone battery lower.